Hey everypony, Brad the Browncoat Brony here with my first reading. I'm really stoked about this, so let's just get into this. Anything else I have to say, I'll take care of at the end. So yeah, let's just dive right in. Get the ball rolling. Today I'm reading a story called Dragging Your Hooves by Twinkletail. This is a story about Spike getting turned into a pony somehow, and you know, I don't want to spoil too much, but it's so yeah. Let's get started. Dragging Your Hooves by Twinkletail. Chapter 1. Oh, come on, Twilight! Can't I have a bit of time to myself? Spike kicked a stray bottle in Twilight's lab, annoyed. He had been working all day, organizing the Purple Unicorn's various potions, powders, and scrolls. He wasn't alone. She spent most of the day at it as well. It was tiring, tedious work, though. We only have a little more to take care of, Spike, Twilight said in a motherly tone. We should be done within the next hour. She sighed as she moved a stack of vials aside to allow room for a different group of vials. Spike was a good dragon, if a tiny bit lazy. She did feel a little bad for working him all day, but he was a young dragon, and it was important for him to learn the importance of hard work. But my bedtime's in an hour, Spike moaned. Spike, I'll hear no more of this complaining, Twilight said a bit sternly. I appreciate the work you've done very much, but we can't leave a job unfinished. We've got work to do tomorrow as well. But I'll let you sleep in a bit if you help me finish with this now, okay? Fine, Spike said, admitting to himself that getting some extra sleep was worth it. Good, Twilight said, smiling. Now do me a favor and move these flasks over there. And be sure to be careful. Twilight floated a handful of flasks over to Spike, and he took them in his arms. Of course, Spike said confidently. Careful is my middle name. The stack was a bit tall and the tiniest bit unsteady, but Spike wanted to get the job done fast, and despite what he'd said, he had no interest in taking it slowly and carefully. A few hasty steps and Spike found himself nearly falling over. Luckily, Twilight's magic steadied him and the stack of flasks just in time. Spike shot a sheepish look to Twilight, who raised an eyebrow at him. It's not my legal name? Spike said, offering a weak smile. Phew! Spike exclaimed, exhausted. We're finally done! The baby dragon ached all over from the hard work, but it was more than likely psychological, as moving things from one place to another wasn't anything he wasn't used to doing. Can I go to bed now? Twilight smiled warmly. All right, Spike, you can go to bed. Spike didn't need to hear any more. He made a mad dash towards the laboratory door. Wait! Twilight yelled, stopping him in his tracks. Oh, what is it now? Spike said, dragging his feet as he walked back down the stairs. He looked up to see one more flask floating towards him. We forgot this one, Twilight said as Spike reached out to take the flask. Just put this over on the middle shelf of the flask section and we're good to go. I'm on it, Spike exclaimed as he rushed towards the shelf, wanting to get it done as fast as possible so he could get to bed. Spike, you're going to break something! Twilight shouted as he neared the shelf at rapid pace. Oh, calm down, Twilight, Spike said as he skidded to a halt just before reaching the shelf. I'm not going to break anything. Spike looked at Twilight and gave her a sly grin, knowing that she expected him to crash into the shelf. In doing so, however, he failed to notice that he wasn't quite as close to the shelf as he thought. He released the flask, expecting it to rest on the shelf, and was shocked when it burst open at his feet, covering him with an unidentified powder. Spike! Twilight shouted as the baby dragon coughed, sneezed, and generally freaked out. Oh, no, Spike said, trying to shake the powder off. What was this stuff? What's gonna happen to me? Calm down, Spike, Twilight said, floating a towel over to him. You're lucky the powder you just spilled only affects pony physiology. Now get to bed before I decide to revoke your sleeping in rights for tomorrow. But are you sure I'll be okay? Spike asked, toweling off the last of the powder. I feel kind of funny. Are you a pony, Spike? Twilight asked, glaring at him. No. Then you'll be fine, Twilight answered flatly. Now go to bed. I'll meet you upstairs, after I finish making another batch of that powder. The baby dragon trudged up the steps, under Twilight's disdainful eye. He continued to worry as he climbed into bed, and was sure that something felt weird, even though he couldn't place his finger on what exactly it was. However, Twilight did know her stuff, and if she said it would only affect ponies, then that had to be the case. It wasn't long before Spike was fast asleep. The morning sun shone through the window, directly into Spike's face as he was waking up. He opened his eyes briefly, then squeezed them shut again to keep the offending sunlight away. This was the one bad thing about sleeping in. He hated waking up early with twilight like he usually had to, but at least the sunlight wasn't so intense that early in the morning. The positives did outweigh the negatives, however, as he had gotten such a wonderful night's sleep that he had nearly forgotten about his mishap in the lab last night. Spike yawned, starting to stir from his comfortable position. He touched a single hoof to his face, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. For some reason, even when he got a good night's sleep, he still felt tired for a while after waking up, but it was nothing a good stretch couldn't fix. Spike rolled out of bed onto his hooves. He stretched, his forelegs first, then his hind legs, then finally his wings. That felt the best of all. He loved stretching his wings. Wait. Spike reached his hand out in front of him, only it wasn't a hand anymore. He stared blankly at the purple hoof in front of him for a couple of seconds. He took a few steps forward, very clumsily, as something about walking on two legs felt awkward now. He soon fell forward, landing on his hooves. On all fours, he slowly walked towards the nearest mirror. After seeing hooves where his hands used to be, he already expected the sight he saw when he looked in the mirror. However, that didn't stop it from being surprising. Twilight! The purple unicorn practically flew up the stairs when she heard Spike shout her name. She had already been up and working, and she didn't like to be distracted from her work. But the sense of urgency in his voice was enough to take her away from it. She burst in through the door to her room to see what the problem was. Spike, what's... It wasn't physically possible for Twilight's jaw to hit the ground and still remain connected, but it sure was making a fine effort to do so. In front of Twilight stood a purple colt with a green mane. She instantly knew that it was Spike. Fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it! Spike cried, stomping his front hooves on the ground until his lack of competence with his new body caused him to slip up and fall onto his face. Calm down, I can fix this, Twilight said in a panic. I just gotta... She paused. In all her studies, she had never come across something like this. She'd read of ponies being turned into dragons, ponies being turned into other ponies, and on one very rare occasion, ponies being turned into plants. Never before had she read of a dragon becoming a pony. Hurry, Twilight! Spike shouted. I can't take any more of this! I don't want to be a pony! Twilight paused, then she glared at Spike. And what exactly is wrong with being a pony? The purple unicorn asked. Spike gulped. Well, he stammered. I happen to think you look cute as a little foal, Twilight said, a smirk across her face. And I have half a mind to leave you like that if you're going to have that kind of attitude. I'm sorry, Spike said, his new pony ears folding down. There's nothing wrong with being a pony. Now please, find a way to change me back. Twilight couldn't help but chuckle a bit. She loved Spike, but it was so easy to manipulate him sometimes. Okay, Spike, I'm going to check out my books and see if I can figure out how to change you back. You stay here and try not to get into any trouble, okay? Spike nodded vigorously. The purple unicorn turned to exit the room, but looked back with a grin before she left. Oh, and are you feeling sick? Twilight asked. No, Spike said. Oh, I thought you were, she said, barely containing a laugh. Because you look like a small horse. Spike stared at her confused. It's a joke, Twilight said, nearly falling over with laughter. Did you mean you look a little horse? Spike said. Oh, yes, that was it, Twilight said. I usually don't do jokes. Twilight trotted out of the room, still smiling, as Spike rolled his eyes. Spike paced back and forth, waiting impatiently for Twilight to come up with a cure for his condition. The pacing was going surprisingly well. Every step was met with difficulty at first, but he had gradually gotten more and more used to his new body. After a bit of confident pacing, he decided to try a bit of a run. There were a few trip-ups, as was to be expected, but after a little while he was galloping with relative ease. As he galloped, he felt his wing brush against a nearby lamp. He had completely forgotten that he had become a Pegasus. His tests with flying were far less successful than his walking and running attempts, but he was eventually able to get himself to hover a tiny bit off the ground. It was all his little wings would allow, but he was satisfied with it. Suddenly Spike had a thought. He had never really fully examined himself in the mirror earlier. What was his cutie mark? Surely there would be something awesome, since he was a dragon, well, usually, of many talents. He was a great writer, so maybe he'd get a quill, or a microphone for his announcing talent, or maybe a burly bicep to represent how buff and manly he was. Spike bolted towards the mirror and turned to check out his flank, and he saw no cutie mark. Spike sighed. He had never really understood why Apple Bloom was so bent up about not having her cutie mark, but the disappointment at seeing a distinct lack of cutie mark on his own flank, even though he wasn't naturally a pony, was a bit of a shot in the arm. Spike looked up at the clock on the wall. He had been waiting for so long, and was more than a bit restless. He didn't like being cooped up in this room all this time without being asleep, and he was feeling too energetic to nap while waiting. He decided that despite being stuck in this body, he was going to go out and do something to break the monotony. The purple Pegasus trotted up to the door and went to grab the doorknob, and soon discovered that a lack of fingers made doorknobs a formidable foe. Spike spent a good 5 minutes trying and trying before he was finally able to get the doorknob to turn. He took a single step out of his room. "Spike!" Twilight's voice yelled from downstairs. "Don't even think of going anywhere like that!" Spike groaned and returned to his room, shutting the door again. He just couldn't stay in this room any longer. The purple Pegasus looked around the room for some way of escape, when his eyes came to rest on the bed sheets. It took quite a bit of effort, but he managed to get the sheets tied together, and anchored them to the foot of Twilight's bed. The other went out the window, and his escape was a success. Spike delighted in the feeling of the grass beneath his hooves. He trotted in circles, feeling the breeze pass through his mane as he did so. He had no intentions of staying in this form, but for the time being it wasn't so bad. And then he decided he was ready to attempt flying again. This time went even better than the last attempt. He started hovering, but after a little bit he was able to raise himself a little higher into the air and even do a small flip. Spike was immensely proud of himself as he touched down again. Suddenly he heard a voice behind him. "Wow, that was so cool!" A young female voice called out. Spike turned around to see 3 young fillies staring at him. He recognized one of them as Applejack's little sister, Apple Bloom. He'd seen her around a few times, but he didn't immediately recognize the 2 others with her. "You must be new around here," Apple Bloom said. "I've never seen you before." Her eyes tracked from Spike to the train of bedsheets coming out of Twilight's window. "Oh, do you know Twilight Sparkle?" Spike was about to tell them about what happened, but the true story of what happened made him sound like a major klutz, and he didn't want that. I'm Twilight's little cousin," Spike said hurriedly, "and I'm visiting from out of town." He surprised himself. He'd meant to make up a different story about how he became a pony, but what was said, and he had to stick to it now. "Apple Bloom, look!" The white unicorn filly standing next to her said, pointing at Spike. "He doesn't have his cutie mark either." "We should let him join our club," the orange Pegasus on the other side of Apple Bloom said as the white one nodded. "Well, yeah, he can hang out with us if he wants," Apple Bloom said, smiling. She then took a step towards Spike and extended a hoof. "How would you like to join the Cutie Mark Crusaders in their quest to find their cutie marks?" Spike considered this for a moment, then decided that it was something to do, and shook her hoof. "The name's Apple Bloom," the little yellow earth pony said, smiling. "I'm Scootaloo," shouted the orange Pegasus. "And I'm Sweetie Belle," the white unicorn said. "What's your name?" "I'm Spot," Spike started, then caught himself. He couldn't go around saying his name was Spike, or surely they'd figure out what was going on. Spark, he finished. Sparkstar is my name. He smiled, impressed with himself for coming up with a name so quickly. Well, it's awful nice to meet you, Sparkstar, Apple Bloom said. She then quickly looked at her flank. Aw, no Palatinus, Cutie Mark? Come on! The others inspected their flanks as well, and were met with equal disappointment. So, what do you girls usually do? Come on, girls, Apple Bloom said excitedly. Let's show Sparkstar how the Cutie Mark Crusaders get things done! Cutie Mark Crusaders, go! The three of them shouted. Cutie Mark Crusaders, go! Spike echoed, a little late. The three girls dashed off, as he followed close behind. These three seemed like they knew how to have fun. Twilight Sparkle smiled as she finished the final touch on her antidote. This had been a much quicker process than her attempt at finding a counter to that love spell she'd accidentally cast on Rarity a while back, probably because she knew exactly what the powder that had caused the transformation was. It was a bit strange that the powder had caused a pony transformation. She hadn't expected that result at all. Luckily, the horrible rash that was the powder's intended effect on ponies didn't seem to be showing up at all on Spike. Regardless, the concoction she had come up with was the exact opposite of the powder, guaranteed to erase any and all effects created by it. Twilight nodded her head confidently at a job well done. Now all she had to do was administer the concoction to Spike, and everything would be back to normal. Spike! Twilight called as she trotted up the stairs. Spike! The lack of reaction didn't concern Twilight at first. She figured that the poor little guy, worn out from his ordeal, had fallen back asleep while waiting. She smiled, thinking of him tucked in bed. He really was adorable as a foal, something she was going to be sure to lord playfully over him before she changed him back, since she knew how bothered it would make him. Spike! Twilight started as she opened the door. He was not in his bed. In fact, nothing was in his bed. Not even the sheets, because they were tied to the foot of the bed leading out to the window. Her eyes narrowed, and her smile turned into a frown. She then trotted back downstairs and exited her house. Spike was going to be in a lot of trouble when she found him. Spike had begun to slightly reconsider things as he followed the Cutie Mark Crusaders. He had been happy to join them at first, wanting something fun to do. The more he thought about it, though, the more he worried. These were 3 young fillies he was following around. He was likely to get stuck doing something silly and girly. And that was not at all what he wanted. He was a bit lazy sometimes, but at times like this, where he wanted to be out having fun, he was more of the type to go adventuring or doing something physical. Girly activities did not suit him. They were totally out of the question. As the fillies came to a halt, he looked around and realized that they were in a field of flowers. His mind raced, filling with the thoughts of possible activities that he wanted no part of. Flower picking? Well, that was all he could come up with, really. It still didn't appeal to him. Are you ready, Sparkstar? Scootaloo asked, breaking him out of his train of thought. Yeah, he said. What are we doing anyway? He dreaded the answer. Suddenly, a football thwacked him right in the side of his face. Cutie Mark Crusaders football players! Apple Bloom shouted and tackled Spike to the ground. Spike was shocked. He couldn't say he expected this. He laughed as he got up and dusted himself off. Maybe this would be more fun than he was expecting. He scooped the football up in his forehooves and tossed it towards Sweetie Belle. She tried to catch it, but missed and fell down. He felt a bit bad for the moment, but it was all in good fun. The football experiment ended up being a failure, with none of the 4 gaining their cutie marks from it. Their next attempt, at Scootaloo's request, was karate display, and it went no better. This theme continued for the next 2 or so hours. Every single thing they tried was met with failure and a lack of cutie marks. Still, Spike was enjoying every second of it. Races, sports, of the regular and extreme varieties, none of it was what he expected from the 3 fillies, and every bit of it was a blast. This was more fun than he'd had in ages. It was around the time that a Cutie Mark Crusaders mixed martial arts tournament was organized that Spike noticed Sweetie Belle sitting around, looking generally unhappy. He hadn't realized it until just then, but now that he thought about it, she hadn't really been into any of the activities that he'd been taking part in. Apple Bloom and Scootaloo were all gung-ho about everything they'd been doing, but for the most part, Sweetie Belle either participated to a lower extent or, in the last few activities, barely even participated at all. She looked particularly sad right now, and Spike felt compelled to go talk to her. While Apple Bloom and Scootaloo were busy practicing arm bars on each other, Spike sidled up to Sweetie. "Is everything okay, Sweetie Belle?" Spike asked. "You seem kind of upset." Sweetie looked up at Spike and put on an obviously fake smile. "I'm fine," Sweetie Belle responded, trying to sound happy. "I'm having a great time playing sports and running races and doing other physical things that I'm no good at." Sweetie's fake smile quickly faded into a frown, and she buried her face in her hooves. She wasn't crying, but she seemed like she was about to at any moment. "Oh, come on," Spike said. "You weren't so bad." Now that he remembered it better, she was kind of bad in most of their activities, but he didn't want to tell her that when she was this upset. "Yes, I was," Sweetie Belle said. "Did you see when I dropped the football? Or when I tripped 3 times during that one race? I'm so bad at these things. And they're all Apple Bloom and Scootaloo ever want to do." Seeing Sweetie Belle so upset was starting to make Spike feel bad. He was enjoying the physical activities so much. He wasn't paying any attention to the fact that Sweetie wasn't having a good time either. "You should probably let them know that you don't want to do the things they always want to do," Spike told her, trying his best to help. "I've tried," Sweetie moaned, "but they never want to do the things that I want to do, and it's 2 against 1, so we never get to do them." "Well, what kinds of things do you want to do?" Spike asked. Sweetie looked up at Spike in amazement. He guessed to himself that she wasn't asked that question very often. "Well," Sweetie said, "I kinda wanted to have a tea party, and I thought maybe we could try modeling some clothes or something." Spike began to zone out. This was exactly what he'd been fearing. He had absolutely zero interest in any of these things Sweetie suggested. His train of thought was interrupted when he noticed Sweetie Belle had stopped talking and was looking at him expectantly. She looked so excited that someone had taken an interest in what she wanted to do, and he did feel bad that the others never wanted to indulge her. "Well, if Apple Bloom and Scootaloo are too busy to do what you want to do, then how about I do those things with you?" Spike instantly regretted saying this, but the look of absolute joy on Sweetie's face made him feel better. He felt Sweetie suddenly grab his hoof and drag him over to where Apple Bloom and Scootaloo were training. "Hey girls, Sparkstar and I are going to split off and try some activities together. Okay, see you girls later." Sweetie bubbled excitedly. Before Apple Bloom or Scootaloo could say a word, Sweetie had dashed off with... Before Apple Bloom or Scootaloo could say a word, Sweetie had dashed off, with Spike trying his hardest to catch up with her. Spike couldn't believe he was letting this happen. A day ago, he would have never seen himself in this situation, and it wasn't just because he wouldn't have expected to be a pony. Yet there he was, sitting still while Sweetie Belle applied copious amounts of blush to his cheeks. He had been tolerating this kind of thing for the last hour or so. First it was a tea party, then main styling, modeling, and now a few makeovers. Spike hated every last second of it, yet he didn't dare tell Sweetie that. He knew how painful it was for one to be left behind by their friends. Twilight and the gang didn't do it to him too much, but there were definitely times where he felt more than a bit left out. Seeing how happy his participation in these activities made Sweetie was worth the girly torture. It was weird. He hadn't even known Sweetie this morning, and here he was, going out of his way to make her happy. "There," Sweetie said proudly. "You look..." She trailed off before breaking into laughter. "Oh gosh, Sparkstar, I'm sorry, but you look so funny." She pulled a mirror over, and at the sight of himself, Spike joined in her laughing. He did look pretty ridiculous. "Well, I guess we're not getting a makeover, cutie mark," Sweetie said as she helped Spike wash the makeup off his face. "I'm okay with that," Spike said. "I don't know if I'd really want a lipstick cutie mark." The two laughed again. After the laughter subsided, Sweetie Belle looked Spike in the eyes. He was surprised by the sudden eye contact, but didn't break it. "Sparkstar, thank you so much for today," Sweetie said, a bit of a tear forming in her eye. "I love Apple Bloom and Scootaloo, but they never want to do girly stuff. You're a boy, and you're still letting me dress you up and put makeup on you. And I think it's really nice that you do all that to make me happy, even though I can tell you really don't like it." "Oh, that's not true, Sweetie," Spike said. "I do like it." The white unicorn raised an eyebrow at him, and he smirked. "Okay, so I don't like it, but it's okay, I guess, because you're having a good time." Spike smiled, then looked down to notice that he was holding Sweetie's hoof. She noticed at the same time, and the two quickly pulled their hooves away, blushing. Sorry, they both said at the same time, avoiding eye contact. A moment of silence passed before Spike looked back up at Sweetie. Sweetie? Spike started. Is it okay if I... Before he could finish his sentence, the white filly was already holding his hoof again. Spike smiled contently. The other stuff he and Sweetie had been doing was boring and annoying, but this sure wasn't. There you are! Twilight's voice suddenly boomed. Spike and Sweetie's heads whipped over to see the purple unicorn walking towards them. Twilight! Spike exclaimed. I've been looking all over for you, Twilight started. I know! Spike quickly interrupted. My dear cousin Twilight Sparkle! I am sorry your loving cousin Sparkstar ran off without telling you. Spike winked at Twilight, and she gave him a confused look. Her eyes darted down to see him holding Sweetie's hoof, and her look of anger changed to one of understanding. Yes, Twilight said. You should be sorry, Sparkster. Sparkstar, Spike quickly corrected her. Of course, Twilight said hurriedly. Don't you just love that game where we pretend to forget each other's names? Best game ever, Midnight, Spike responded. He gave Twilight a thank you so much look, and she nodded. Well, Sparkstar, we should be getting back to my house, Twilight said. I figured something out that might interest you, and I need to show it to you before you head back to Canterlot. So say goodbye to Sweetie Belle, okay? Spike, realizing what she meant, smiled from ear to ear. He let go of Sweetie's hoof and stood up. It was nice meeting you, Sweetie Belle, Spike said, giving her a gentlemanly bow. Tell Apple Bloom and Scootaloo I say goodbye, okay? Sweetie nodded, smiling. It was nice meeting you too, Sparkstar, the little white unicorn said. And thanks again for today. I hope you come back and visit real soon. Just as Spike was about to leave, he was surprised as Sweetie Belle gave him a quick kiss on the cheek. Spike's wings flared out and his face turned beet red as Sweetie ran off giggling. So did you have a good day, Romeo? Twilight said, her smile a mix of genuine happiness and playful mocking. Your girlfriend seems to like you quite a bit. Girlfriend? Spike stuttered, turning red again. She's... Twilight put a hoof over his mouth. Sure she isn't, the purple unicorn laughed. Now let's get you changed back, okay? Twilight levitated a flask of powder over and sprinkled its contents onto Spike. He felt a bizarre warm feeling as it covered him. He was then enveloped in a white glow. When it faded away, he looked down at himself to see that he was once again a dragon. Yes! Spike exclaimed, admiring the return of his dragon body. Thank you, Twilight! Of course, Spike, Twilight said, laughing. I couldn't just leave you like that. The purple unicorn's eyes suddenly went wide. Oh no, I just realized that I haven't written a letter to Princess Celestia. I can't think of a single thing I've learned about friendship today. I've got this one covered, Twilight, Spike said, picking up a scroll and quill. Dear Princess Celestia, this is Spike. Today I learned a valuable lesson about friendship. I learned that if you spend too much time concentrating on the way you like to live your life, you might find that you're not focusing enough on the things that are important to those close to you. I also learned that sometimes if you really want to understand where your friends are coming from, sometimes it's important to try and walking a mile in their horseshoes. Twilight chuckled and patted him on the head. That's very astute of you, Spike, she said, smiling. Now you should get some more rest. You mean I can have the rest of the day off? Spike asked excitedly. I think you've had enough of an adventure today to warrant a rest, Twilight answered. And then tomorrow you can go tell Sweetie Belle the truth about who Sparkstar is. What? Spike cried. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Oh, come on, Spike, Twilight said. Oh, and I can't wait to tell Rarity. What? Spike shouted. You can't tell Rarity. Oh, she's bound to find out anyway, Twilight said, laughing. Do you really think her sister wouldn't tell her about the pony she kissed today? Spike turned stark white. Sweetie is Rarity's sister? Spike promptly fainted. Twilight laughed and floated him onto his bed. Get some rest, Sparkstar. Chapter 2. It was precisely 8:23 a.m. Hardly a time for baby dragons to be awake, especially on a Sunday morning. Of course, had he been permitted to choose his own wake-up day, Spike very well might have spent the entire day in bed, and there wasn't a snowball's chance in Tartarus that Twilight would have allowed that. Luckily for the baby dragon, Twilight's opinion of his daily schedule wouldn't be an issue for the next few days. Perhaps one early Sunday wake-up wasn't so bad with that fact kept in mind. The fatigue from his interrupted sleep would fade in the next few hours. Such a period of time was nothing compared to all the free time coming to him. "Spike! Spike!" came the call from downstairs. Twilight was already awake. Of course Twilight was awake. With the scheduled departure time of 8:28 a.m., she'd likely been awake for the last 3 or 4 hours. Spike grumbled as he rolled out of bed, just barely awake enough to keep him from face-planting. The unicorn's voice was impossibly cheery for this time of morning. Spike reflected on this, wondering if perhaps it had something to do with that gross brown stuff he'd often see left over in a pot in the kitchen each morning, with the particular smell that would often match up with the scent of her breath as she'd inform him of the day's activities. Surely it had to be one of the most powerful potions she was capable of brewing, if it granted the logic-defying ability to be perky at 8:26 a.m. "Spike! It's 8:26 a.m.!" Twilight shouted, urgency beginning to peek its head through her cheery demeanor. Spike summoned all the energy his tired little body would muster and made his way downstairs, nearly tripping over the giant bag of books that would be his burden as he accompanied Twilight to the train station. For one truncated moment, he wondered why one pony would need this many books for a 3-day trip. After admitting to himself that this was Twilight he was dealing with, he found himself surprised that there was only one bag. Showing off his amazing dragon strength, Spike grabbed the bag by the ends and hoisted it over his shoulder, promptly toppling over. "Spike, we have no time for games!" Twilight said, her tone dripping with impatience. "The library is precisely 5 minutes and 37 seconds from the train station, so if we don't leave right now, blah blah blah." Spike quickly tuned out. He was nowhere near awake enough for a lecture. The baby dragon rose to his feet and dusted himself off, and lifted the bag in a far less showy way, letting the weight settle handily over his shoulder. "Are you listening, Spike?" Twilight asked, starting to get irritated. "Of course," Spike lied. "Then what did I say?" Twilight shot back, an eyebrow raised. Spike blinked, unsure. Blah blah blah?" Spike offered, a weak smile crossing his face. "Very good, Spike," came Twilight's response as she returned to her cheery disposition. "I just wanted to see if you were listening. Now let's go." Twilight led the way, the encumbered baby dragon following her close behind. "Now, Spike," Twilight said, the train looming into view, "you remember everything I told you, right?" Spike rolled his eyes. She'd only gone over it about 20 times last night, and that wasn't even taking into consideration the myriad times she'd gone over it prior. He took a deep breath and went over the list he'd heard so many times. "Make sure to put any books I use back in their place on the shelf. If a pony takes out a book, take their information down and put it in the files. Feed Owlicious twice a day, and leave the window open for him at night. And do not go into your lab!" He made sure to put emphasis exactly where Twilight had. Her specificity likely stretched beyond the actual words and into their presentation. The unicorn could sense her protégé's frustration and gave him a warm, sympathetic smile. "I'm sorry, Spike," Twilight said. "I'm just worried is all. It's not every day that the princesses call me to the palace for an extended stay, and I just want to make sure everything at home is going to be just fine." She reached a hoof over and gave her protégé's head a playful rub. "I know I can trust you." Spike puffed with pride, returning her smile. Twilight could be a bit frustrating at times, with her obsessive need for order and her insistence on making sure that there wasn't a slight chance of anything going wrong. These were qualities, however, that made her approval and vote of confidence mean that much more. "There's the train!" Twilight exclaimed, overflowing with anticipation. "Now you behave yourself while I'm gone, all right? And who knows? There just might be a few bonus gems in it for you if everything goes well." Those were the words Spike wanted to hear. Twilight offered a hoof, and he stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her for a goodbye hug. "And good luck with whatever the princesses need you for," Spike replied. The unicorn smiled and gave him a little nuzzle before releasing. Spike gave her a wave as she stepped onto the train, running back on the platform to watch her from the window of the seat that she chose. The train eventually lurched forward, and the dragon, despite his fatigue, ran along with the train until he couldn't keep up anymore. Twilight returned his waving as long as she could see him, although they continued long after, until the train was but a speck on the horizon. "Wow," Spike said to no pony in particular. "An entire 3 days with the whole library to myself." He could barely contain his excitement, bouncing on his toes. "I'm gonna make the most of this! I've got so many things I've always wanted to do but haven't had the chance!" With that, he began his trip back to the library, determined to make the most of his newfound free time. It was 9:04 a.m., and Spike had nearly run out of things to do. The youngster was positively baffled. He knew there were a lot of things that he'd always thought about doing while Twilight was home but had no time to do because she'd always had one job or another for him to take care of. Why was it, then, that when he finally had time to do those things, he couldn't remember for the life of him what they were? He sat there on the chair in the library, dangling his feet off to the side. Boring. This was fun earlier, when he'd checked feet dangling off the short list of things that he'd been able to come up with. But by this point, it was old hat. There was no way he could possibly spend an entire 3 days like this. Surely he'd go mad from boredom first, and then Twilight would come home and see that he had gone mad, and she'd get all worried, and they'd have to call a psychiatrist in, and he would be diagnosed with severe boredom disorder. The prognosis would be bleak. No fun idea that Twilight or any pony else came up with would be able to knock him out of the madness so intense. He would surely have to live the rest of his life as a dull, non-responsive lump, never again capable of experiencing the joy of fun. Spike looked at his list and checked off daydreaming. Now his list was complete. And it was only 9:06! The dragon sighed as he slid off the chair and headed towards the window. "Here lies Spike," he said, taking on a melodramatic tone. "Taken before his time. A victim of acute boarditis." Spending so much time around Rarity did wonders for the young dragon's ability to wax the dramatic. He gazed out the window, watching the other ponies pass by. Lyra and Bonbon were trotting together, as they always did, headed towards the town square. He considered joining them, but he didn't really know them all that well, and given that they were together, it was likely that they weren't looking for any more company. Along trotted Junebug, her basket filled with flowers. It only took a moment for Spike to pass on the idea of joining her. She'd been a little awkward around him ever since the birthday incident, and it wasn't very likely that anything would come from him accompanying her. It was then that Spike noticed 3 familiar young fillies playing a short distance away from the library. He watched Applebloom, Scootaloo, and especially Sweetie Belle, as they laughed and played together. Bloom and Sweetie had cotton balls pasted all over them, and they were running from Scootaloo, who was pursuing them in what could only be described as a large paper mask, making an honest attempt at trying to resemble a wolf's face. Surely this was yet another attempt by the 3 to get their cutie marks, although Spike, for the life of him, couldn't figure how such an activity could possibly be a special talent. It sure did look fun, though. A smile crossed Spike's lips as he watched them, remembering the fun times he'd had with the 3 about a week ago. He had never gone to Rarity to tell the truth about the incident that day. Actually, that was a lie. He had gone to tell her, but he chickened out at the last moment due to Sweetie suddenly entering the room. He supposed he could just tell her another time. After all, it wasn't like Sparkstar was coming back. Spike's eyes lit up. He quickly turned from the window, excited over his sudden idea. There was no chance he'd remain bored now, not with this gem of an idea. The word gem made him stop in his tracks, though. Twilight had implied that she'd give him some gems for him when she got home, but with the condition that everything went well. This meant following her rules to a T, and blatantly breaking the 4th and most accentuated rule was certainly not following her rules to a T. He let out a small sigh. It had been a good idea, too. He looked back out the window, watching the fillies play. Scootalwolf just pounced Sheepy Belle and was trying to pretend to gobble her up, but Applebloom was now arguing, insisting that there was no way she could get her cutie mark in being prey if Scootaloo was only preying on Sweetie. Spike watched and smiled as the 3 entered a tussle cloud. Twilight would probably never notice 2 little bottles missing from her lab. Oh, who was he kidding? Of course she'd noticed. She'd noticed everything. But hey, he had 3 days to come up with a good excuse. The baby dragon ran towards the basement, excitement practically leaking from his pores. Even his excitement, however, was not enough to keep him from hesitating, as his claw reached for the laboratory doorknob. He felt a twang of guilt in the pit of his stomach. He wanted so badly to go out and have fun, and being Sparkstar again would be a ton of fun. But Twilight trusted him. Twilight's trust was something worth having, and he wasn't quite sure if he was ready to lose it. His longest finger danced around the circumference of the doorknob as he considered his options. Twilight was a very forgiving pony when it came to those whom she cared for. He could probably get away with this one indiscretion if he apologized profusely. Whether or not it was worth Twilight's disappointment, though, no matter how brief it was, remained to be answered. Spike's fingers kept playing with the doorknob as he pondered, and continued to do so until, to his surprise, the doorknob clattered to the floor. Twilight was usually on top of things in the library that needed to be repaired, but apparently there hadn't been a bit of oversight. Spike reached down to pick up the broken doorknob, but then a devilish grin crossed his face. With a quick motion, he tapped the doorknob with his foot, allowing physics to do the rest as it rolled into the lab. Surely he couldn't be faulted for going into the lab if it was necessary to retrieve broken hardware, right? An excuse would still be needed for the missing concoctions, but that could be taken care of in time. The main moral issue at hand had been solved, albeit in a less than honest manner. It was honest enough for the baby dragon, though, as he entered the forbidden lab. Spike browsed the shelves as he walked through the library. He wished his memory was better, as he desperately tried to find the powder that led to his transformation. He'd been in the lab a number of times, all those accompanying Twilight, but never before did it look as large and imposing as it did this time. Spike took a deep breath, preparing for the long, tedious search. Hopefully he'd be able to find it before the fillies outside got too far away. Of course, considering the magnitude of his search, his greater concern would be if he'd still be searching when Twilight came home in 3 days. It felt like a very real source of disquiet as the young dragon's eyes scanned each of the many shelves that stood in front of him, leading him overjoyed when, only after 10 minutes of investigation, he found a number of vials of the powder on a shelf that looked like it had been around since the time of Discord's original reign. Further investigation revealed a vial of the antidote right next to it. Success! Spike's hand was trembling as he reached for the transformation powder, and he could hardly contain himself as he opened the vial and poured the powder all over himself. Spike stood there, waiting for the transformation to take effect. After a minute or two, though, his impatience began to show through. "Why am I not a pony yet?" Spike grunted, his foot tapping anxiously on the stone floor. It took a moment for him to remember that the previous transformation had taken place overnight. He supposed he could wait for the transformation occurred, but his need to be entertained wouldn't allow it. He eyed the other vials on the shelf. Maybe another dose would speed the process up? Explaining the 3 missing vials would be harder than 2, but just thinking of the fillies having fun and the chance to spend time with Sweetie again was enough to sway him. Maybe he'd get a hold of her hoof again, and maybe she'd give him another kiss. Spike shook his head out. This was no time to sit and daydream. After all, he already checked that off his list. His claw reached out for the second vial, and he dumped its contents all over himself as well. It took a moment, but he soon felt an odd tingling sensation all over his scales. A white light illuminated from the dank basement lab, and he cringed as he felt his body changing. One of the most bizarre feelings he'd ever experienced. Some parts of his body stretched out, others vanished completely. After a few moments of discomfort, the light faded, and Spike landed back on the ground on his hooves. He leapt into the air, letting out a joyous yell before charging upstairs. Yuck! Whose bright idea was this anyway? Applebloom grumbled as she tried in vain to clean the mud off the cotton balls that had been glued all over her body. She knew it was Sweetie Belle who'd posited the idea to the group, but asking that question just felt like something one would do in a situation like this. To be honest, she herself had approved of the idea, as had Scootaloo, but forethought wasn't exactly a talent of theirs. If it were, they'd probably have their cutie marks in it already, and they had no clue what a cutie mark in forethought would look like, so maybe it was for the best. It's gonna take like 30 forevers to get this dirt off, Sweetie moaned. It wasn't her fault things had gone disastrously wrong. She had originally wanted to try and get her cutie mark in roleplay, but then Scootaloo thought being a sheep wasn't, what was the word she used? Awesome-tastic? She wasn't even sure awesome-tastic was a word, but then she wasn't a dictionary or anything. That's probably the least of your worries, Scootaloo said, pulling off her wolf mask. Just think about how hard it's going to be to get that glue off your coats. Scootaloo knew she was the smart one in the group. Her wolf mask was just that, a mask. A rubber band held it over her face, and as she'd just displayed, removing it was nice and simple. Also, Bloom and Sweetie had used up all the glue by the time she'd finished making the mask. Scootaloo! Bloom exclaimed. You knew this whole time that the glue was a bad idea, didn't you? Scootaloo began to giggle. but then decided that giggling wasn't awesome enough, and opted for a snicker instead.
Putting glue all over your coat when you know you're gonna have to pull it off eventually?
Scootaloo asked.
No way, not silly at all. That was sarcasm, by the way. I know what sarcasm is,
Bloom shot back.
But you don't seem to know what warning your friends about a bad idea is. But I guess I don't either, since I didn't tell you how bad your wolf idea was. How'd you get a cutie mark being attacked by a wolf anyway? Hey, it was a great idea,
Scootaloo retorted.
You're just jealous you didn't come up with it first.
Sweetie sighed as she watched Bloom and Scootaloo argue. She could understand if it were an argument for the sake of trying to get a cutie mark in arguing, but they'd tried that ages ago, and already decided that it was a bad idea. This was a real argument, and she wanted no part of it, because then they'd likely to turn on her for having the initial idea of gluing cotton balls to themselves. She'd thrown it out there as a silly idea, not expecting the others to listen, and had been pleasantly surprised when they had. She'd figured that they'd find it way too silly and girly, but they'd gone with it. Well, up until Scootaloo inserted her own idea into the mix that had once again made it into more of a physical competition than she would have liked. It was times like this that she really wished Sparkstar would come and visit again. He'd listen to her ideas and not make her feel silly for them. Plus, holding his hoof really felt nice. She'd been thinking about him a lot since that day, and it would be so nice to hear his voice again.
Hi, sweetie,
Spike said, trotting up alongside her.
What's going on?
Sweetie smiled a vacant smile. Her memory of him was so strong that he could hear his voice as if he were standing right next to her. She closed her eyes and sighed a happy sigh.
Oh, howdy, Sparkstar,
Bloom said cheerfully. She and Scootaloo had stopped arguing a moment ago, having come to a compromise that both of them were equally wrong. And since this meant that they were both equally right, this was the way that they would refer to it. Sweetie, lost in happy thoughts, smiled dreamily.
Yeah, it would be great if Sparkstar was here,
she mused. Spike raised a brow and looked at Apple Bloom and Scootaloo, who just shrugged. Spike couldn't help but blush as he realized how excited Sweetie was at the idea of seeing him again. He felt much the same way, even though he had been seeing her the whole time in his regular form. He grinned and unfurled a wing, gently poking Sweetie on the back. The white filly leapt about a foot into the air, spinning in Spike's direction. Her look of apprehension quickly transformed into a wide smile.
Sparkstar!
Sweetie shouted. Before Spike knew what was happening, the filly wrapped her forelegs around him in a tight hug. It only took a moment of hesitation before he hugged back. The two enjoyed a nice moment, until they noticed Bloom and Scootaloo staring at them. Both ponies quickly let go and whistled innocently, fooling absolutely no pony.
Ew!
Scootaloo said, sticking her tongue out in disgust.
You two are so weird. Well, I think it's sweet,
Bloom said.
You would think that,
Scootaloo scoffed.
You and your sister probably hug all the time. We do not,
Bloom said, suddenly feeling a need to defend herself, even though she and her sister, Applejack, did hug pretty often.
You probably hug every pony,
Scootaloo laughed, sensing a weak point.
You're like a hug monster or something, and that's not even a cool kind of monster. I am not, Bloom retorted. And if I was, I'd probably get a cutie mark in it, and then you'd be all jealous. Who'd be jealous of a boring special talent like hugging?
Scootaloo snarked. Sweetie just sighed as she watched her friends start to argue again. Her worries were practically forgotten as her eyes met Spike's.
So, Sparkstar, what brings you back to Ponyville so soon?
The white filly asked. Spike blinked, realizing that he hadn't even come up with a story. Spike stammered.
Well, you see...
His mind raced, trying to piece together a legitimate-sounding excuse. Quick thinking wasn't exactly his specialty, or else he'd have a cutie mark in it. If dragons turned ponies could get cutie marks, that is.
Oh, you're probably here because Twilight is away and she wants you to watch the library,
Sweetie said, proud of herself for having deduced something.
Exactly,
Spike replied, thrilled that the tough job had been done for him.
But everything in the library seems to be in great shape, so I'm totally available to hang out if you want. That would be great, Sweetie said, giggling and bouncing into the air.
She dashed over to Bloom and Scootaloo, sticking her head between them as they continued to argue.
Let's hang out with Sparkstar, girls.
The two fillies quieted down and looked at their friend, then to Sparkstar, then gave each other a look.
We'll continue this argument later, all right?
Bloom said, offering a hoof of friendship. Scootaloo smiled and gave her a hoof bump.
You got it.
the orange filly said.
For now, we've got some crusading to do.
Yeah! The three exclaimed, jumping into the air and high-hoofing each other.
Cutie Mark Crusaders, go!
Spike, beaming, galloped over and joined the show of unity. Cutie Mark Crusaders, go! He added in enthusiastically. With that, Bloom and Scootaloo galloped off in a random direction. Spike tried to follow them, but he was stopped by Sweetie.
Thanks for coming back,
Sweetie said, a shy smile on her face. Just the sight of her smile was enough for Spike to return it, as he felt a warm, happy feeling in his chest. No problem, Sweetie, he replied, scuffing a hoof in the dirt.
The others stopped fighting as soon as they saw you, Sweetie continued. It normally takes a lot to get them to stop once they've started up.
Well, I don't know what I did, but I'm glad I did it, Spike replied, grinning. Sweetie Belle smiled and gave him another hug.
I hope you keep doing it,
Sweetie said.
You're the best pony ever.
Spike beamed as he heard this. So happy about it, he didn't even notice the odd feeling he got in his belly from it. Had he been near a mirror, or if Sweetie's head wasn't behind his, one of them may have noticed the brief moment in which his eyes turned purple, but such an opportunity was denied by pure happenstance.
Hey!
Bloom called out to the two.
Ain't y'all coming?
Spike and Sweetie let go of each other, blushing. On our way, Spike shouted. He and Sweetie gave each other a warm look and matching smile before running off to catch up with their friends. Chapter 3. There was a certain mystique about the palace in Canterlot. No matter how many times she'd visited the place, whether it be for celebratory events, world-saving measures, or even uncertain situations like the one she found herself in on this occasion, Twilight Sparkle somehow always felt like she was walking through the halls for the very first time. Its regal appearance was unfamiliar, in a very familiar way, a logical fallacy that even the brilliant mind of Princess Celestia's prize student could not wrap itself around. She gazed upon its many splendors, looking as awestruck as the first time she'd been there. She stared with a reverent grin at one of the stained glass windows, the one put up to commemorate the defeat of Nightmare Moon. In her moment of revelry, she had completely forgotten that she was meant to be providing a tour for the one who accompanied her, one to whom this place held no familiarity at all.
I see in your eyes that you admire this prize, the zebra said, giving Twilight's shoulder a tap and meeting her with an amused smile when she turned to face her. But I would appreciate it more if we continued this tour.
Twilight had been pleasantly surprised to run into Zecora on the train ride. She hadn't seen her zebra friend in a good while, and when Zecora informed her that she too had been summoned by the princesses with no explanation, a delighted Twilight couldn't wait for the opportunity to provide her friend with an all-inclusive tour of her hometown. Fortunately for her, the time between the train's arrival and their meeting with the princesses had left ample opportunity to show her around. She was also fortunate to be in the presence of one with such calm patience. Many ponies would have groaned at the thoroughness of Twilight's tour, as she insisted on giving as much history behind each building as she could come up with. Zecora had the patience of a saint, as she allowed the unicorn to prattle on about the multitude of ownership changes that Donut Joe's shop had gone through, the social significance of the house in which the famed author Jade Singer grew up, and the like. Now, even though her relaxed, friendly demeanor tried to hide it, Twilight could sense the slightest bit of impatience behind her words.
Oh, of course,
the embarrassed unicorn said, rubbing the back of her mane sheepishly. She raised a hoof to point towards the window in question, but was stopped by the gold-adorned hoof of her mentor.
I believe the rest of the tour can wait, Twilight,
Princess Celestia said, giving her the gentle smile that she knew so well. She then turned her attention to Zecora, who had lowered herself for a bow.
You may rise, Miss Zecora. I thank you for answering my call.
The zebra rose obediently.
It is a pleasure to meet you, Princess,
Zecora said.
I hope I can help with this mysterious test. Oh, this is not a test, my loyal subject,
Celestia said.
I've simply called the two of you here to represent Equestria in delegations with the ambassadors from Zebraca. With you, Zecora, as our local expert, and you, Twilight, as a close confidant, I figure the two of you can be very helpful in our delegations.
Twilight could barely contain her excitement.
It will be an honor to do this for you and Equestria, Princess,
Twilight said, bowing her head. Zecora gave a nod of agreement.
I knew I could count on you two,
Celestia said, her smile carrying the warmth of the very celestial body whose ascent and descent she was in charge of.
Now, the two of you may retire to the chamber I have arranged for you upstairs. But what about the rest of the tour? Twilight asked.
The princess answered with a light chuckle.
It can wait, Twilight,
the Princess of the Sun said to her charge.
The two of you should be fully rested for tomorrow's meeting.
Twilight nodded obediently as Zecora bowed once more. She wanted so badly to continue the tour, but her mentor was right. Rest was important. The unicorn and zebra entered their designated quarters. They thanked the guard who had led them there and had been nice enough, and thankfully strong enough, to carry their luggage. Twilight wasted no time unpacking a book and laying it down on one of the beds. It took a polite clearing of the throat from Zecora for her to realize that perhaps moving straight into studies was not the most polite of options. "Oh gosh, I'm so sorry, Zecora," the unicorn said. "I didn't mean to be rude." The zebra waved it off. "Do not worry, my studious friend," Zecora said, sitting down herself. "There is no need for your readings to end." She then produced a book of her own, grinned, and opened it. "We both have our share of studies, you see. I can stand up to Bone on my alchemy." Twilight smiled, relieved that she had not insulted her friend. She turned back to her book, but stopped reading again, thinking about what Zecora had said. "Oh!" Twilight exclaimed, causing the zebra to cease her studies as well. "Speaking of alchemy, I found the most intriguing side effect for one of the powders in my lab last week." Zecora's ears perked as she turned her to face Twilight. "A new discovery?" the zebra asked. "Now this intrigues me." Twilight beamed with pride. Zecora was a master at this kind of thing, and to be able to give her what she believed to be new information was very exciting. "Well," Twilight said, puffing her chest out proudly, "I had a certain powder in my collection which, as far as I knew, had only the effect of causing a rash on ponies. Spike spilled it on himself at one point while helping me reorganize my lab, and by the next day he had transformed into a pony." Zecora, who had previously been listening while reading, now turned her full attention to the unicorn. Twilight took a mental note of this and continued. "I was able to engineer a counter powder," Twilight said, "which would erase any effects of the previous powder. And upon application, it changed Spike back right away. Isn't that great?" The unicorn blushed slightly, realizing that she was now gushing. But Zecora seemed unfazed by this, her face still wearing a look of interest. "I must say that despite all my looks, I have never found a powder like that in my books," Zecora mused. It took all of Twilight's restraint not to giggle like a school filly. Impressing Zecora with a feat of alchemy was no easy task. "Oh, and you should have seen Spike," Twilight went on. "He hated it at first, but by the end of the day he almost didn't want to change back." She then grinned. "And I came up with the greatest plan." "A plan, my friend?" Zecora inquired. "To serve what end?" "Well," Twilight responded, rubbing her foreheads together, "I know Spike, and even though I told him not to go into my lab, there's a good chance that he will, especially since he knows I have more of that powder, as well as the antidote in there. But I replaced the antidote with a dummy, so that I'd know when I got home if he disobeyed me. Isn't that smart?" The unicorn beamed at Zecora, but Zecora's face did not share the elation of her peers. "For what it's worth, I do not share your mirth," Zecora said sternly, eliciting a surprised reaction from the unicorn. But, Twilight started, but a look from Zecora silenced her. "A true alchemist is aware," the zebra went on, "that they must always take care, and frivolous use will lead to abuse." She set her book aside, sliding to her hooves. "In your plans to teach Spike to go by the book, did you consider the risks that you took?" Twilight's look of nervousness suddenly changed to one of pride. "Actually," the unicorn responded, "I made sure before I did anything that there would be no negative side effects from the subject going too long without the antidote being administered. I would never want to hurt my #1 assistant. I just want to teach him a lesson about being responsible when left to his own devices." She was once again beaming, and looked to Zecora for her reaction. The zebra's face softened a bit, but still held a certain degree of grimness. "The powder's original effects you did not expect," she said, "but I trust that you kept all possibilities in check." Twilight nodded eagerly. "I believe I did," Twilight concurred. Zecora still looked slightly unsure, but a glance at the time convinced her to drop the issue. "The hour grows late," the zebra said, "and tomorrow is an important date." "We should get some rest," Twilight said. "A fine request," Zecora answered. The two set their books aside, slipped into the covers of their own beds, and shut off the light. Tomorrow was a big day. Even though he loved Twilight like a sister, Spike had to admit to himself that he was quite thankful for her vacation. Even though it had started off with a patch of extreme boredom, the knowledge that he would be able to spend the rest of his break having fun as Sparkstar made up for it in spades. He hadn't even been Sparkstar for the entire day yet, and he was already having the time of his life. He and the Cutie Mark Crusaders had spent a good portion of their morning in the CMC clubhouse. It was decided by the three that before Sparkstar could continue his crusading, he should be officially inducted into the club. After all, if he earned his Cutie Mark without the official paperwork declaring him a member of the club, the others couldn't possibly count it as a victory for the club as a whole. After enduring Scootaloo's drum solo and Sweetie Belle's seemingly endless list of synonyms for name, the group held a celebration for their newest member. Spike couldn't help but question their method of celebration. As far as he knew, most typical exclusive clubs didn't welcome their newest members with an impromptu tag team wrestling match. He had to concede, however, that there wasn't much typical about the Cutie Mark Crusaders. After a hard-fought battle, which ended with Scootaloo pinning Sweetie to earn the victory for herself and Apple Bloom, it was onto a very different activity, as the first Cutie Mark Crusaders beauty pageant was set to begin. Spike couldn't help but be happily impressed at the variation in the Crusaders' planned activities. The dragon-turned-pony had been worried that without him there to stand up for Sweetie Belle, the three would go right back to their usual routine of tending towards more competitive activities. The wrestling match certainly didn't do much to convince him that this was not the case. As it turned out, there didn't seem to be much to worry about. The pageant had actually been Bloom's idea, and despite objections from Scootaloo at first, all four had a good time with it. Spike even allowed the fillies to doll him up with badly applied makeup and a tablecloth meant to represent a dress. No pony earned their cutie marks from this, but a good time was had regardless. After the pageant came lunchtime. Spike found himself getting a bit nervous as the group approached Sweet Apple Acres. It was probably silly after all. The only bit of his pony appearance that was shared with his dragon body was his color scheme. Even that shouldn't have been a problem, as he knew plenty of purple ponies, and there were even a couple with green manes. Still, he couldn't help the little niggling scrap of worry in the back of his mind. Could he really lie about his nature to honest Applejack? If he did, what if she somehow saw right through his charade? Would she be unhappy with him? The girls would be upset with him for lying to them, and his foolproof plan of administering the antidote before Twilight got home would be useless, since there would be no chance of Applejack not informing her of his misdeed. The risk was almost enough to make him turn around and suggest going somewhere else to eat, but that would seem way too suspicious. Luckily for him, Applejack didn't seem to suspect a thing when the three fillies had introduced her to Twilight's purple and green, never-mentioned before Pegasus cousin from out of town. Plus, she called him a very well-mannered colt while serving them their lunch, a compliment that gave him a warm, tingly feeling in his belly. The compliment was followed by a strange look from a far pony as she glanced at his eyes, but he thought little of it, as the delicious food she had served now had his undivided attention. Lunchtime was followed by even more crusading. Spike couldn't wrap his mind around how the three fillies had so much energy. They seemed to never tire, no matter what rigorous physical activity they engaged in. As far as he could remember, though his memory was a bit cloudy, there was never a time where he was this active for so long without needing at least a short nap. Somewhere in between the jousting tournament and the attempt at trying to wake their latent psychic abilities or something, Spike was forced to sit aside and request a nap. The idea was met with hesitation at first by Bloom and Scoot, as napping would probably take him away from any chance of earning a cutie mark for a while, unless his special talent was sleeping. Unsurprisingly, it was Sweetie who came to his defense, insisting that they could afford to wait just a little bit while he slept. As Spike drifted off for a much-needed nap in the grass, he could have sworn he had heard the other two make some little comments toward Sweetie and her defense of her colt friend. As embarrassing as it was to be called that, he couldn't help but feel happy, as another warm, tingly feeling invaded his belly before he went to sleep. Evening soon came, and even the most energetic of young ponies had to rest at some point. Even fatigue, however, proved incapable of keeping the four close friends separated. Some pony, no pony could remember amidst the excitement, had suggested the idea of a slumber party, and the idea was met mostly with positivity. It was decided that the library would be the easiest location to hold it, since not only did it put Spike where he needed to be to feed Owlicious, but it was also the one location at which they would not be bothered by an older sibling. The fillies still had one remaining issue, though, and that was the uncertainty that they would be allowed to not only spend the night without supervision, but to also have a slumber party with a colt on the guest list. Luckily, things seemed to be looking in their favor. Rainbow Dash, Scootaloo's surrogate sister of sorts, had been the easiest to convince, giving her permission quickly and basing it on the idea that Scootaloo was almost as awesome as she was, and therefore could handle herself and the others and didn't need supervision. Applejack, on the other hoof, was the complete opposite. Bloom reasoned with her for what seemed like an hour before the farmer's resolve cracked, and she was forced to admit that as long as they didn't go outside until morning, there wasn't much for them to get themselves into trouble with at the library. Spike was very relieved that Twilight had apparently not told Applejack about her lab, and chose to also withhold that information. He seriously doubted they'd use the lab anyway. The group now had the approval of 2 of the 3 ponies whose approval they had needed. Unfortunately for Spike, the last one was the one that made him the most nervous. He had intended to come to Rarity a week ago and inform her of the things that had gone on the last time he was Sparkstar, but his nerves would not allow him to do so. If he had only told her back then, this upcoming meeting might not have been quite as awkward. Yet there he was, approaching Carousel Boutique as Sparkstar, lacking any semblance of a game plan. There was no way he could tell her now, not in this situation. No, he'd have to wait until after Twilight was back and he could change back. Spike felt an odd feeling as he thought this. His mind felt a bit clouded earlier, but now it was feeling much clearer. Spike wasn't quite sure why this was. He could still be scatterbrained at some times, but the previous level of absent-mindedness wasn't something he was used to. He had practically forgotten all about the fact that Rarity didn't know he was Sparkstar before that moment. Such a thing would likely have been on his mind before. For the life of him, he couldn't explain why such an important detail had been forgotten until that point. As Sweetie opened Carousel Boutique's front door, Spike started going over what he had to say to Rarity in his head. He wasn't telling her right now either way, but it would probably be best to plan in advance for when he did.
"Oh, is this your cold friend?"
Rarity's voice sang as she smiled down at Spike. He looked up at her and forgot all about what he had just been thinking about. The warm, tingly feeling returned as he processed those words. Something about them felt right.
"Rarity!"
Sweetie whined, cheeks turning red as Bloom and Scoots giggled.
"We're just friends, okay?"
"Oh, nonsense!" the fashion-minded unicorn said with a little smile.
"It's not every day that you come home gushing about the cult you spent the day with."
Spike felt tingly all over, happy that Sweetie had apparently been speaking so highly of him to her sister.
"He's not my cult friend,"
Sweetie said, stomping her hoof as Bloom and Scoots continued to giggle at their friend's embarrassment.
"He's just a colt who's a friend."
Spike found himself blushing and smiling as he listened to the back and forth. The tingly feeling was growing stronger, and he had no clue why, but he wasn't complaining. It felt nice and oddly right.
"So you're Twilight's little cousin Sparkstar?"
Rarity asked, despite already knowing the answer. Spike nodded, overcoming his blush and smiling. Rarity cooed and ruffled his mane with a hoof.
"Well, aren't you just a handsome young colt?"
the unicorn said, giggling. Spike, still blushing, beamed, the tingling feeling growing stronger than ever.
"Come on, Rarity, that's enough,"
Sweetie spoke up.
"We came here to ask you something."
Spike blinked. He'd almost forgotten why they were even there.
"Oh?"
Rarity asked, removing her hoof from Spike's head.
"What is it, darlings?"
"We were all hanging out," Bloom started before Scootaloo nudged her away in front of her.
"And it's getting late, but we don't want to stop hanging out,"
the Pegasus continued before being interrupted by Sweetie Belle.
"So we wanted to have a slumber party,"
Sweetie said. "So I offered up the library for it," Sparkstar added.
"And Apple Bloom and Rainbow Dash already said it was all right,"
Bloom made sure to add.
"We figured a slumber party with a colt in the house and no adults might sound bad,"
Scootaloo said, scuffling her hoof in the dirt.
"But their sisters said it was okay,"
Sweetie exclaimed. Rarity blinked a few times, reeling from the verbal storm from the 4 young ponies. Once she'd finished processing everything, she looked at the 4 a bit sternly.
"I must say, I'm not really sure about this,"
Rarity said.
"After all, you may see yourselves as mature young ladies, and one mature young man, but I'm not quite sure I could give you my consent if there is no supervision."
Spike's heart sank, and Bloom and Scoots looked disappointed as well. However, Sweetie had not exhausted her bag of tricks.
"Aww,"
Sweetie sighed, her eyes becoming large and sad.
"Well, I guess you don't want to make me happy." "Oh, no, sweetie. This isn't going to work,"
Rarity said, looking away.
"I mean, Applejack said Apple Bloom could do it, like a good big sister would." "Sweetie Belle, you cut that out right now,"
Rarity said. She was trying to raise her voice, but she was beginning to falter.
"And even Rainbow Dash said Scootaloo could go,"
Sweetie went on.
"But I guess if you don't want to even be as good a sister as some pony who technically isn't related to her little sister."
That was the final straw.
"Very well,"
Rarity shouted.
"Yes, you may go, Sweetie Belle, because I'm a wonderful big sister, correct?"
Sweetie beamed and hugged Rarity's leg tightly.
"Correct."
the unicorn filly said happily. The two sisters shared a slightly fabricated sisterly moment as an astonished Spike looked on. Bloom and Scoots were used to this kind of thing by now. Rarity then looked to Spike.
I trust you are responsible enough to keep an eye on my sister and her friends, Sparkstar?
Rarity asked. Spike blinked, snapping out of his distraction, and nodded.
You have my word, Rarity, Spike said confidently. I will treat your sister and her friends with the utmost care.
The fashion-minded unicorn gave him a smile and a pat on the head.
Excellent,
Rarity said.
You seem like a very good pony to me, Sparkstar.
Spike smiled, feeling tingly all over, as his eyes, unnoticed by the others, changed from green to purple. He was a good pony. Chapter 4. Sparkstar had never been to a slumber party before. Or had he? For some reason he couldn't quite remember, a fact which he found quite odd. With how much fun he'd been having so far at this slumber party, he was sure that he would have remembered if he had been to another one. The Pegasus was forced to deduce, based on this evidence, that he had not, in fact, ever been to a slumber party. With this question out of the way, he started to wonder why he hadn't. Surely his friends in Canterlot would have invited him if they'd had one. He'd never been left out by any of his good friends, whose names and faces he was having trouble remembering. He was positive that he had friends back home in Canterlot. All ponies his age did, so why couldn't he even remember having any? He found his memory to be very foggy, and attributed it to the exhaustion from all the fun he'd been having with the Cutie Mark Crusaders today. Sparkstar decided not to worry about it for now. He'd worry about it when twilight returned and he went back home.
It's your turn, Sparkstar!
Sweetie Belle sang, shaking him and releasing him from his thoughts. He glanced around, first at the eager face of the filly in front of him, wearing the same pretty smile that she had been for the most of the day. He returned the smile, then turned his attention to the other two fillies. Apple Bloom and Scootaloo were staring at him, and he had no clue why. Bloom looked confused, while Scootaloo's expression was a mix of boredom and annoyance. My turn for what? Sparkstar asked, tilting his head. Sweetie giggled, while Bloom sighed and Scoot slapped a hoof to her forehead.
I said, truth or dare,
Bloom said evenly, as if she'd been over this numerous times. In fact, she had been over this numerous times. Oh! Sparkstar said, chuckling awkwardly. Sorry, I kinda spaced out there for a moment.
We noticed, came
Scootaloo's flat reply. Sparkstar chuckled nervously, aware of how annoyed the others, save for Sweetie Belle, were getting with him. Sparkstar mused, weighing the options in his head. Truth or Dare was an intense, intimidating game. At least it seemed like it. He couldn't remember if he'd played it before tonight.
Truth or Dare?
Bloom repeated, emphasizing both choices.
Truth,
Sparkstar finally said. Bloom tapped a hoof to her chin, trying to come up with the perfect question. Her eyes suddenly lit up.
Do you have a filly friend back home in Canterlot?
Bloom asked. Sweetie's eyes grew wide, while Scootaloo's rolled.
What a lame question,
Scoots said.
You couldn't have asked him something like, have you ever eaten a bug, or what's your favorite kind of explosion or something? Now cut that out, Scootaloo,
Bloom responded.
It's my question, and that's what I want to ask.
She then turned her attention back to Sparkstar.
So, do you have a filly friend back home in Canterlot?
Sparkstar tilted his head. He tried to think back, but for some reason he was drawing a complete blank.
I'm not sure,
he finally answered meekly. What? Scootaloo interjected.
How can you not know if you have a filly friend? Isn't that the kind of thing you'd remember?
The Pegasus colt chuckled nervously.
I guess not,
was his reply. Scootaloo groaned.
Well, I guess that works,
Bloom said, looking unsure. Sweetie started to say something, but Scootaloo, however, was not convinced.
No way!
Scoots shouted, hopping into the air, her wings flapping rapidly.
He can't get away with an I don't know. He's gotta do a dare.
Sparkstar began to protest, but Bloom seemed convinced.
Yeah, all right,
Bloom said, grinning.
You gotta do a dare now.
Sweetie giggled, Scootaloo smirked proudly, and Sparkstar sighed.
All right,
the colt said.
So what's the dare?
A wicked smile crossed Bloom's face.
I dare you,
Bloom said,
to kiss Sweetie on the lips.
Both Sparkstar and Sweetie turned brilliant shades of crimson, suddenly finding very interesting things to look at on the library floor. Bloom smirked triumphantly, and even Scootaloo seemed intrigued. A deafening silence filled the library, broken only by a hoot. "Oh!" Sparkstar exclaimed. "I need to feed Owlicious!" He began to get up, but Yellow and Orange Hooves held him down.
"Nuh-uh,"
Blooms taunted.
"not till you do the dare."
"But," Sparkstar started. Then he looked at Sweetie. He figured he must have looked like he was trying way too hard to get out of the dare, because the look of sadness and rejection in Sweetie's eyes was too much for him to bear.
"All right,"
Sparkstar said, noticing Sweetie's change in demeanor as he voiced his consent. He tried to get up and head over to Sweetie, but such measures would prove to be unnecessary, as the two found themselves pushed right up to each other by their friends. Both ponies stared at each other for what seemed like an eternity, blushing profusely. It was the colt that made the first move, leaning forward slightly. Sweetie hesitated before mirroring his movements. Two sets of lips discovered each other, in an awkward encounter that only lasted about a second. Sparkstar felt his cheeks burning as both Bloom and Scoots giggled. He looked back towards Sweetie, whose cheeks were even redder than his. The two shared a short moment smiling at each other.
"Okay, come on now,"
Bloom said unceremoniously, breaking the moment.
"Your turn to ask, Sparky."
Sparkstar blinked, snapping out of his stupor.
Right,"
the colt stammered. His voice had risen about an octave, eliciting another round of giggles from the fillies. The game continued, but Sparkstar found it harder to concentrate, as Sweetie made sure to move up right next to him. Her leaning on him was a giant distraction, but none that garnered any complaints from either party, although Scootaloo did offer the occasional "blah" or "ew" here and there. The game didn't last much longer, as the lack of attention paid by half of the participants made it difficult to continue. The rest of the night consisted of various other typical slumber party activities. Throughout all of this, Sparkstar and Sweetie were practically inseparable. The two made sure to team up together for the pillow fight, and it was thanks to Sparkstar's holding Sweetie's hoof that she was able to make it through the particularly scary ghost story from Scootaloo. The four young ponies eventually found themselves too sleepy to go on, and they retired to their sleeping bags. Sparkstar and Sweetie waited until their friends were sound asleep, then shared one more very quick peck before slipping into their own sleeping bags. Sparkstar closed his eyes and sighed in a content sigh. He couldn't remember a time where he had been quite this happy. Then again, he couldn't remember all that much at all. But that wasn't important now. He needed sleep. Twilight Sparkle had to admit she was kind of hoping for Monday not to come so quickly. Sure, she missed Spike, Owlicious, and her friends, but it was nice to be in Canterlot again, and so exciting to play such an important role in the meeting with the ambassadors from Zebraca. Never in her life had she expected to be given such an important task. But then again, had she been asked to predict her future when she was a filly, it was a safe bet to say that she would have never expected a majority of the events that had happened in her life. Her studies had been very handy in the delegates with the Zebracan ambassadors, as had the presence of Zecora to aid her. With Zecora's help, she had managed to work up a perfect facsimile of the traditional Zebracan headdress used for grand occasions such as this, and the ambassadors had been very pleased with their efforts. A good first impression was crucial in situations like this, and judging from the reactions the ambassadors gave, this first impression was quite positive. Talks went very well, and it didn't take long before a new Equestria Zebraca trade agreement had been signed into action. Everything about it was so exciting that Twilight did not want it to end. But it did, as all things must. As disappointed as she was to see it end, though, Twilight was excited to see her friends again. As happy as Twilight was for the success in the weekend's delegations, she couldn't match Zecora's joy. The zebra hadn't seen another zebra in ages, and she was overjoyed to not only deal with others from her homeland, but to be doing so on official business, having been specially selected by the princess. It was an unbelievable honor for the humble zebra, and one that she accepted with grace, although no one could miss the look of pride on her face when she was recognized by one of the delegates. Zecora's bliss was great relief for Twilight. Besides being happy to see her friends so elated, it took some of the pressure off of her and her situation with Spike. Zecora had been quite vocal about her disapproval of Twilight's alchemical abuse as a means of revenge, but the distraction provided by the delegates saved her from any more stern talking to from Zecora. Of course, this did not save her from hearing about it on the train ride home.
"I must confess, my dear Twilight,"
the zebra said, shifting in her seat to get more comfortable,
"I do not think what you did was right."
The unicorn sighed, trying not to sound too exasperated.
"I understand your concerns, Zecora," Twilight responded, "but I can assure you that I did my research on this powder before putting my plan into effect. I made sure that there was no harm from prolonged exposure, nor from having the dummy antidote applied while its effects persisted. The worst thing I could think of that could possibly happen is some of the powder accidentally getting on a pony, and the worst thing that could possibly happen from that is a mild rash."
She smiled proudly, sure that Zecora would be impressed by her thoroughness, and was surprised to have her smile met with a look of uncertainty. "The tools of an alchemist are not meant for play," Zecora said sagely. "I hope you do not find this out the hard way." "I'm sure that everything will be just fine, Zecora," Twilight told her. She had to admit to herself, though, that her friend's warnings were starting to get to her. Little specks of doubt were starting to invade her mind, jabbing relentlessly at her. Had she perhaps missed a bit of information somewhere? Could she have accidentally forgotten some possibility? No, she couldn't have. She had gone as far as to look up each individual component of the powder. When it came to studying, there was no pony more thorough than Twilight Sparkle, and she had brought this thoroughness to this task in full force, as the safety of her #1 assistant was at stake. She had researched every single possible factor of that powder, of what a dose would do to him, of what lasting effects it would have, everything. Absolutely, positively, 100%, no doubts whatsoever, even though her brain might be entertaining other possibilities. Everything. "I must insist," Zecora started. "There is nothing I missed!" Twilight interjected a bit loudly. Her face flushed as the looks not only from Zecora, but from most of the other passengers on the car, forced her to realize how loud she had gotten. She smiled awkwardly before continuing. "Would you like to come back to the library with me and see for yourself, Zecora?" "Perhaps I shall, my cacophonous pal," Zecora responded with a smirk, causing the already flustered unicorn to sink deeper into her seat. Twilight's departure from the train was a strange one. Sometimes all it took to judge the mood of a pony was to examine their manner of trotting. But even the most empathetic pony might have had difficulty discerning the motivation behind her confused gait. It held a particular combination of confidence and uncertainty, as its owner's mind raced with both emotions. Her face was a portrait of calmness, displaying the exact emotion that she wished could be the only one racing about in her mind. Competing with it was her sense of doubt. As sure as she was that she had taken care of everything and researched every possible outcome of the powder, something about her obsessive nature would not allow her to rest on her laurels. And unclear images which never defined themselves as past something might be wrong. She couldn't let Zecora know that, though. Not after her staunch passion that told otherwise. Twilight would glance back every once in a while to see the zebra's face, and each time she would silently chastise herself for doing it, then put on a confident smile that she knew had to be triggering suspicion. If it was, though, Zecora wasn't telling. Twilight opened the library door, taking a few steps in before setting her bags down. She glanced around the library, and as expected, it was nice and clean. She had expected Spike to disobey her as far as the lab and powder went, but she had never once questioned whether or not he would fulfill her expectations of order and cleanliness. He was her #1 assistant for a good reason, after all. "Spike! I'm home!" Twilight called out, stepping aside to allow Zecora entry. As expected, her call was not answered. She led the zebra down to her lab, hesitating momentarily as she found the doorknob must have fallen off the lab door. She had been meaning to fix that for ages, and resolved to get right to it as soon as she proved herself right about the Spike situation. Twilight intended to leave Zecora right to the shelf where the vials would presumably be missing, but such measures proved unnecessary, as the discovery of a discarded vial on the floor was all she needed. She gave a smirk back to Zecora, but the zebra's stoic gaze stopped her before she could point out all the signs that were pointing towards her being right about Spike disobeying her. Instead, she simply headed upstairs, motioning with her head for Zecora to follow. It didn't take long to figure out where Spike would be, or at least who he would be with. Twilight vividly remembered the happy look on Spike's face when she found him with Sweetie Belle, as well as his stories about how much fun he'd had with her, Apple Bloom, and Scootaloo. There was no doubt in her mind that she'd find him with the Cutie Mark Crusaders. The only question remaining was where she would have to look to find him. Luckily for her and Zecora, the search would not prove to be a long one. "Cutie Mark Crusaders ornithological enthusiasts! Yay!" came a cry from down the road. Twilight and Zecora watched with bemusement as the CMC, with the bona fide Spike in tow, charged down the dirt path, chasing a gaggle of very agitated geese. Twilight shook her head as she watched them. As proud as she was of Spike for using the word ornithological, her disappointment in him for disobeying her direct order outweighed it. Even more painful for her was the fact that he seemed perfectly fine with doing what he was doing. She had expected him to be in a more worried state due to the antidote not working, but it was evident that she had no qualms about being found like this. She lit up her horn, lifting the dragon-turned pony off the ground. "Hey, what gives?" Sparkstar exclaimed, hooves flailing in the air. His attention turned to the annoyed purple unicorn and her zebra friend off to the side, and he pawed. Hi, Twilight. Hey, Zecora. Sorry I wasn't there to meet you at the train station and carry your bags, Twilight. But I promise I did all of the chores you wanted me to do.
Yes, the house was left neat as I had expected, Twilight conceded. But you still explicitly disobeyed my rules, Spike. Spike?
Sweetie asked, raising a brow.
Twilight?
Scootaloo spoke up.
This is Sparkstar. Did you not get enough sleep this weekend or something?
Yeah, I'm not Spike, Sparkstar said, looking as confused as the girls. I'm your cousin Sparkstar, remember? Twilight simply shook her head.
That's enough of this game, Spike,
Twilight said sternly, going into full-on caretaker mode.
We are going home and changing you back right now. I'll let you come and explain everything to them once I've changed you back.
Sparkstar, confused as anything, gave a wave to the equally baffled Cutie Mark Crusaders before being levitated off.
I'm very disappointed in you, Spike,
Twilight said evenly as the group reached the library.
I told you specifically not to go into my lab, and what did you do?
Twilight, you're not making any sense, Sparkstar said timidly, even though he knew he hadn't done anything wrong. Twilight's stern mode was still intimidating. Even though he couldn't remember a specific instance, he was sure he'd been on the receiving end of it before, and wasn't a fun place to be, probably.
I'm not going to punish you for this, Spike,
Twilight continued, leasing him and Zecora inside.
I think feeling bad about disobeying me is punishment enough.
I'm not Spike, Sparkstar said, unable to keep his own voice down. I'm Sparkstar!
Very funny, Spike,
Twilight said, approaching the lab.
Now, did you even bother trying the antidote, or did you just decide to stay like this?
Antidote for what? The poor confused Colt said.
You don't have to keep up the act any longer, Spike,
Twilight told him, entering the lab.
Zecora knows what's going on, and your friends aren't here right now.
She turned to him to look him in the eyes, and was taken aback. She didn't remember his eyes being purple. Not even when he'd last become a pony. It wasn't just that, though. She dealt with Spike when he was trying to blatantly lie to her, and he'd never pulled it off this convincingly before. From the look he was giving her, it almost looked as if he completely believed what he was saying, and he was doing a very convincing job of pretending to be bewildered. He gave a glance to Zecora, who opted to remain silent and see how things would play out. That bit of doubt was beginning to creep its way into her head again. She tried her hardest to ignore it as they approached the shelf where the powder and its antidote rested. She sighed lightly as she noticed that the dummy antidote's vial had not even been touched.
You didn't even try to hide it from me,
Twilight said softly, placing the dummy on a counter.
That hurts, Spike. It really hurt.
I wouldn't want to hurt you, Twilight, Sparkstar said, a desperate tone in his voice. I don't even know what this is, but I'm sorry either way. Twilight raised a brow. Spike was not this good of an actor. Again, she gave a concerned look to Zecora, and again Zecora said nothing. She began to reach for the next vial of the antidote, but she couldn't help but notice that not one, but two of the vials of the powder were missing.
Spike?
The unicorn asked, unable to keep her growing nervousness from invading her voice.
Did you use 2 vials of powder instead of 1?
Zecora tilted her head, concern growing on her face as well.
What powder?
He asked in return.
And I'm not Spike!
The unicorn did not provide a response. Not a word was spoken as she practically flew up the stairs towards her study. Chapter 5. If there was one thing that Twilight Sparkle was known for around Ponyville, it was her part in saving Equestria numerous times from various dangers. If there were 2 things Twilight was known for around Ponyville, they were her part in saving Equestria numerous times from various dangers, and her propensity for organization. Everything that she dealt with had to be neat and organized at all times. To be fair, one would expect no less from a librarian, but there were times that Twilight took it just a bit too far. This was not one of those times. Books were strewn all around the Element of Magic's bedroom. This in itself was not abnormal. Twilight would often have many books nearby. She would suddenly wish to change topics of research or cross-reference a fact she'd read. The abnormality rose from the disorderly manner in which they were tossed about, a far cry from the carefully arranged stacks one would typically find. Sometimes even the neatest of ponies could eschew order if there were more pressing matters to attend to, and in Twilight's frenzied state, she had no time to worry about neat piles. She would take care of it once the crisis was averted. I hate to say I told you so, Zecora said calmly as she assisted her friend in searching through the books, for it is something you already know. Twilight knew that Zecora wasn't trying to be rude. She was a wonderful friend and would never do such a thing intentionally. It just wasn't what she wanted to hear right now. Perhaps it may have been something that she needed to hear, but wanted was another story altogether. She was okay with being told that she was wrong about something when it truly was the case. That wasn't the issue. The issue was that she had been so certain that she had researched all possible outcomes for the situation. With how thorough her studying methods were, to make as large an oversight as she had was frankly embarrassing, and she didn't need to, well, didn't want to be informed of it. She answered Zecora with an exasperated sigh, akin to the ones she'd often respond to her parents with when she was a filly. It was slightly rude, but Zecora would understand. She added, "Apologize to Zecora for rude sigh," to her mental checklist of post-crisis activities. Right before, put books in neat piles. Friendship was more important than neat piles as well.
"This doesn't make any sense,"
the unicorn muttered as she rifled through her research material.
"I was certain I'd looked through every book on the matter."
"Perhaps there may be one you missed," Zecora responded. "Have you compiled a complete list?"
"Of course,"
Twilight answered, presenting the zebra with a list of all her research materials on the matter. Zecora looked through it carefully. After a few moments, her eyes lit up. "For your subject, you have found a great many books," she told Twilight, "but there seems to be one you have overlooked."
"That's impossible,"
Twilight said, but her statement was proven false when the zebra showed her a book. Twilight blew the dust off the green hardcover and inspected it.
"The Powerful Pony's Primer to Potent Potions and Powders,"
the unicorn read.
"I'd looked for this, but I couldn't find it. Where did you find it?"
"One would assume for it to be under P," Zecora answered, "but instead I found it under T." Twilight groaned, knowing exactly what happened.
"I told Spike that one ignores A, an, and the when alphabetizing,"
Twilight said, exasperated.
"I'll have to go over that section later. Did you find anything useful in it?"
Zecora nodded and Twilight's eyes lit up.
"What does it say? What does it say?"
the unicorn begged.
"I would read you the details of this curse,"
Zecora told her with a small smirk,
"but I'm afraid it is not written in verse."
Twilight rolled her eyes at Zecora's poorly timed joke and took the book, turning to the page that the zebra had bookmarked. She read dutifully, recognizing the ingredients as being identical to the ones she'd used in the powder.
"1 dose of the powder causes a rash when applied to a pony,"
Twilight read.
"But 1 dose applied to a non-pony creature will cause a complete transformation onto a pony form within an 8-hour time span. A 2nd dose will greatly accelerate the transformation time, providing transformation within 2 minutes. But the subject risks mental transformation as well, which is accelerated by reaffirmation of their new form."
Twilight's heart sank as she stared into the middle distance.
"What have I done to poor Spike?"
"Relax, my friend," Zecora said, patting her on the back. "You can make this curse end." Twilight sighed miserably before perking up.
"I can!"
the unicorn exclaimed.
"I can make it end!"
Before Zecora could stop her, Twilight zoomed out of the room, a look of sheer determination in her eyes. Her hooves wouldn't allow her to stop until she reached Spike's door. With a quick surge of magic, she threw the door open, surprising the dragon-turned-pony.
"Twilight, what's wrong?"
Sparkstar asked, bewildered. Twilight calmed herself as much as her nerves would allow and sat down in front of Spike.
"You're not a pony," Twilight said evenly. "You're Spike, a baby dragon and my #1 assistant, and I'm going to help you remember."
She closed her eyes and touched her horn to Spike's head, concentrating. Her horn lit up as she cast the memory spell on him, the one that had worked so effectively on her friends during Discord's takeover of Ponyville. The purple Pegasus looked at her, unsure of what was going on. After a few moments of casting, Twilight dimmed her horn and smiled at Spike.
"Do you remember now?"
Twilight said, a hopeful grin on her face.
"Remember what?"
Sparkstar asked, head tilted.
"Being a baby dragon," the element of magic answered.
"Twilight, I'm not a dragon," he said, starting to get uncomfortable. Twilight drooped.
Why didn't it work?"
the baffled pony asked.
"That spell worked perfectly on the girls."
Before Sparkstar could say a word, even though he had no clue what he could possibly say in this situation, Twilight zoomed out of the room, returning moments later with a vial of the antidote.
"I'll show you, Spike,"
she said, determination in her voice.
"I'll fix the mistake I made and get my #1 assistant back, if it's the last thing I do."
The dragon-turned-Pegasus had no time to respond before he was doused with the strange powder. He felt a bizarre feeling of warmth all over, before being bathed in a bright white light. Twilight closed her eyes tightly, hoping beyond hope that this would do the trick. It was a few moments before she could muster up the courage to look. One purple eye cracked open slightly, surveying the scene. The other quickly followed, as she was overjoyed to be presented with the sight of her #1 assistant once more.
"It worked!"
Twilight shouted, starting to bounce around in circles.
"Yes! Yes! 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 Yes!"
Spike looked himself over. He picked up one of his dragony feet, wiggled his dragony fingers, swung his dragony tail.
"I'm a dragon!"
he exclaimed.
"Yes! You're a dragon!"
Twilight responded giddily.
"This is awesome!"
Spike said. How long is this gonna last? Twilight stopped bouncing.
What do you mean, how long is this going to last?
Twilight asked. Well, it's not permanent, is it? The dragon asked, looking nervous. I mean, this could be fun for a while, but I don't want to totally stop being a pony.
But you...
The unicorn stammered before running back out of the room towards her lab. Twilight, wait! Sparkstar shouted after her. I don't even know how to be a dragon! He shook his head as she paid him no heed. Twilight could be so weird sometimes. He hopped up onto the bed, kicking his new dragon legs. He stuck his tongue out and gawked how cool and lizard-like it was. He hopped back onto his feet, then felt a burp coming on. He made sure that Twilight was not within earshot, then belched out loud, watching a green trail of flame spew from his mouth. Whoa! He marveled. A guy could get used to this. He fiddled with his newfound claws, reaching towards a nearby book and picking it up. It didn't take him long to decide that fingers were quite possibly the coolest things in the history of things. An impressive feat considering how many things there were. His mind worked quickly, and he came to a conclusion. I have got to show the girls!
So what do you think that was all about?
Apple Bloom asked her friends as she hopped onto a swing. After Twilight's interruption and the removal of Sparkstar, the three had gone to a nearby park, just across the way from Golden Oak's library. None of them had said a word on the short trot over, too confused over the awkward situation to even comment on it until now.
I still think Twilight didn't get enough sleep,
Scootaloo answered, placing her front hooves on Bloom's back and giving her swing a nice push.
I mean, Spike isn't even a pony. How could she mix him and Sparkstar up?
I don't know, Bloom said, holding tightly onto the swing's chains.
Though I guess they're pretty much the same colors and all. Huh, they are, aren't they?
The Pegasus filly mused, stepping out of the way just in time to avoid a Bloom to the face.
Maybe Twilight suddenly got a disorder where she can't tell who's who and just guesses based on what color they are. But I guess then she might have called Sweetie Belle Rarity. Or you, Applejack,
Bloom said with a grin as she swung forward again.
Hey, I'm a so much more awesome orange than Applejack,
Scootaloo responded with a huff.
Nuh-uh,
Bloom shouted back.
Applejack's the best orange. And besides, we have different color manes,
Scootaloo said, helping Bloom with another strong push.
So she'd have to think I'm like a mix of Applejack and Rarity or something. Rarajack. Why's Rarity gotta come first?
Bloom said, swinging back again.
Because apple tea sounds dumb,
Scootaloo retorted.
And it sounds like a drink. I'm not a drink. That's true,
Bloom answered, a grin on her face.
'Cause if you were, you'd be chicken juice. That isn't even a thing,
Scoots shouted. Sweetie Belle sighed as she watched the two from about 10 feet away. She'd been stationed there with a large mattress so that she could catch Bloom when she inevitably jumped. Or fell, which was honestly more likely. All she could concentrate on now, though, was the fact that the two were arguing once again. The unicorn couldn't understand how two friends as good as Bloom and Scoots could argue that much. They were just fine most of the time, but the arguments were frequent, and it seemed like each one was louder and angrier than the one before. The only time she could think of where they went for an extended period without arguing was when Sparkstar was around. Sweetie's heart began to race as she thought about Sparkstar. Even the simple act of thinking about him gave her a nice warm feeling in the pit of her belly. Her friends teased her about it, and even her sister would get on her case here and there about
the handsome young colt who'd stolen her heart.
Rarity had read too many romance novels. At the same time, though, she couldn't deny the crush she'd developed on him. He was so nice, and so handsome, and a great kisser. Her cheeks reddened as she thought about that. She and Sparkstar had spent most of the past few days trying to find reasons to go off by themselves, hiding themselves away so that they could share another kiss without being heckled. As far as they knew, their friends were oblivious to what they'd been doing. She hoped they were, at least. If they had noticed, they hadn't said a word. She sighed again, her face falling into the thick mattress. Why did he have to go home? Why couldn't he stay here and play with her and give her more kisses? It wasn't fair. Sweetie Belle, hey! Sweetie's ears perked up. There was no way she could be that lucky. Her head swung around, hoping beyond hope that she would see that handsome colt standing next to her. Her enthusiasm drained as she saw Spike standing next to her. Not that she didn't like Spike. She hadn't interacted with him much, but he was always nice when she had. He just wasn't what she was hoping for right now.
Oh, hi, Spike,
Sweetie said, instantly feeling bad about the disappointment that had seeped its way into her tone. Spike didn't deserve to feel bad just because she was hoping to see some pony else. Her tone, however, seemed to go right over the head of the excitable baby dragon.
I'm not Spike, he exclaimed, beaming. I'm Sparkstar. Twilight turned me into a dragon. Isn't that cool?
The filly raised one brow, looking over him critically. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility that Twilight had changed Sparkstar into a dragon. But why would she? And why would she make him into one that looked exactly like Spike?
That's silly, Spike,
Sweetie answered.
I know you're Spike. You look exactly like Spike. I'm not Spike. I'm Sparkstar, the dragon argued. Come on, let's kiss while Bloom and Scoots are busy arguing.
Sweetie gawked at him. Then realization set in, and her eyes narrowed.
Oh, very funny, Spike,
the unicorn filly shouted, startling her dragon companion.
You must have heard that Sparkstar and I were kissing, didn't you?
Spike began, but Sweetie cut him off.
And now you're pretending you're him, but turned into a dragon so you can kiss me, aren't you?
She yelled, steaming.
Well, I'm not that dumb, okay?
She felt her eyes begin to water, but stood strong.
And it's really mean of you to try and play a trick like that on me. But I'm not,
Spike said meekly, somewhat terrified of the usually gentle Sweetie changing so drastically.
Just cut it out!
Sweetie shouted. Before Spike could utter another word, she ran off as fast as her little legs could take her. Spike's heart sank as he watched her abscond. That wasn't the result he'd been hoping for at all. He tried to go back over the events in his head to figure out what he'd done wrong, because he couldn't for the life of him figure out what it was. His thought process was soon interrupted by a loud thump on the mattress next to him.
Did I get it? Did I get my living projectile, Cutie Mark?
The little yellow filly anxiously looked back towards her flank, her ears drooping when she saw that it was still blank. She then turned her attention towards the dejected dragon standing off to the side.
Hey, Spike! What's wrong? Where'd Sweetie go?
I'm not Spike, the saddened dragon replied weakly. I'm Sparkstar, and she ran away 'cause she was upset with me. Bloom gave a confused look, one that was echoed by Scootaloo, who had just joined them.
But you're a dragon,
Apple Bloom said matter-of-factly.
And you look exactly like Spike,
Scootaloo added. Twilight turned me into a dragon, Spike exclaimed, and I wanted to come to show you three, and I thought Sweetie would think it was cool, but then she thought I was playing a trick on her.
But why would Twilight turn you into a dragon that looks just like Spike?
Bloom asked, looking him over. Spike sighed, not too keen on going through this again right after it had upset Sweetie so much. Thankfully, he wouldn't have to.
Spike!
Twilight shouted as she ran out to meet him, followed closely by Zecora.
There you are!
Spike drooped even more, ready for another reprimanding from the mare. I'm still not Spike, he said quietly, and I'm sorry that I left the library without telling you.
Never mind that,
Twilight responded.
I'm the one who should be sorry. Sorry for making a big mess of everything just to prove a point. What are you talking about, Twilight?
Scootaloo piped up.
Did you really turn Sparkstar into a dragon like he said?
Twilight fell silent, hesitant to explain, but a gaze from Zecora goaded her on.
Girls, this isn't Sparkstar,
the element of magic said, shame in her voice.
There never was a Sparkstar. Spike accidentally dropped a powder on himself that turned him into a pony the first time. He did it on purpose the second time, but I'd set him up for it. I didn't realize that he'd take 2 doses, though, and that made him forget who he really was and think that he was really Sparkstar. And I'm so sorry for doing that to my #1 assistant.
Spike, Bloom, and Scoots all looked at each other, none of them sure whether or not they were supposed to believe her. It was Bloom who finally spoke after a moment of silence.
Seriously?
Bloom asked, her tone flat.
Seriously,
Twilight responded.
But Zecora found the right concoction to reverse the effects, and I'm going to fix it once and for all.
She knelt down in front of Spike, floating a vial out of her saddlebags. She uncorked the vial, holding it up in front of Spike. He made a scrunchy face, watching the smoke billow from the opening. He sniffed it and recoiled, clearly put off by its aroma. The confused dragon looked up into Twilight's eyes. She didn't have to say a word. The genuineness in her eyes was enough for him. The dragon took a deep breath. He downed the vial's vile contents as quickly as his throat would let him. The poor baby dragon retched violently, brought to his knees by the foul flavor. Twilight winced, barely able to watch her #1 assistant in such agony. She attempted to step towards him, but was held back by Zecora, who shook her head. After a few moments of groaning, Spike's cheeks puffed out, and a powerful green flame burst from his mouth. Twilight, Zecora, Bloom, and Scoots ducked out of the way of the terrifying fire, watching with wide eyes as it shaped itself into the form of a pony head, then dissipated as quickly as it formed. Spike, exhausted by the entire ordeal, flopped onto his back.
Spike! Spike, are you okay?
Twilight cried out as she and the others ran over to check on him. Tense movements passed as Spike lay on the ground, and Twilight feared that she had done something wrong. Her fears were thankfully quelled when Spike sat up with a sputter.
Spike?
The lavender unicorn asked tentatively.
You know you're Spike, right?
The dragon rubbed his aching head, then nodded.
I do, Twilight,
he said, looking ashamed.
And I'm really sorry that I broke your trust. I don't care about that anymore,
Twilight said, scooping him up into a tight hug, swallowing hard to keep back her tears.
I screwed up, and all that I care about now is that you're okay.
The two shared a long hug, eliciting an
"Aww"
from Apple Bloom and an
"Ew"
from Scootaloo.
I can't believe that whole story is really true,
Bloom said excitedly.
I didn't even know it was possible to turn a dragon into a pony and vice versa. Hey, you should turn us into dragons,
Scoots exclaimed.
No!
Twilight shouted back. She quickly realized how loud she'd gotten and blushed.
I mean, no. That's enough species swapping for now. I think what we need now is to head back home. But we can't yet, Spike said, shaking his head. I need to go explain everything to Sweetie. She reacted kind of badly when I tried to explain things the wrong way before. Hey, yeah, that reminds me,
Apple Bloom said, suddenly taking an aggressive stance, one that was mirrored by Scootaloo.
What did you say to her to make her run off all upset like that? Yeah,
Scoots said, frowning.
The Cutie Mark Crusaders stick together. When you upset one of us, you upset us all.
Spike looked at the two angry fillies in front of him. Honestly, they weren't terribly intimidating. Or at least they shouldn't have been. No, they certainly shouldn't have been. Yet there he was, getting nervous from being stared down by them. He didn't really want to reveal the exact reason for Sweetie running away. It would just make the girls laugh at him. Then Twilight would go on about his little mare friend again. None of it would go well. At the same time, he knew he couldn't possibly get out of this situation without letting it spill. All the attention was on him, and it didn't look to be going anywhere until he explained himself. He'd sighed a deep, painful sigh.
She didn't believe that I was Sparkstar,
he said, starting to wince in anticipation of his next words.
And she got upset when I asked if we could kiss.
Twilight, Zecora, and the fillies looked at him silently for a very long moment, before Bloom broke the silence.
Aww!
Bloom cooed, putting a foreleg around him.
You really do like her, huh?
Twilight and Zecora exchanged knowing glances, while Scoots looked disgusted.
Well, yeah,
Spike said shyly, kicking a foot in the dirt.
She's nice and pretty and sweet. Though I guess that makes sense since sweet's part of her name.
Twilight stepped in, placing a hoof on Spike's shoulder.
Then go tell her that,
Twilight said, smiling warmly to him.
But I'm not even a pony,
Spike said worriedly. Twilight simply rolled her eyes.
That never stopped you with Rarity,
she said with a smirk.
Oh yeah, good point.
Spike was forced to concede.
But what about the fact that I was lying to her about Sparkstar? She'll get mad at me and hate me forever and... Spike,
Bloom said, stuffing a hoof into his mouth before he could continue.
Just go. It'll be fun.
She hesitated, trying to think up a profound statement to convince him. Profundity was not her strong suit, but she tried nonetheless.
It's like the apple and the worm. The worm lives in the apple, and the pony wants to eat the apple, but if he worries too much about the worm, he won't even try it. Though I guess he shouldn't, because there's a worm in it, and I suppose it should be the pony and the apple instead. Just go before all this talk about love and kissing makes me throw up!
Scootaloo groaned, nudging the still babbling Apple Bloom away. Spike nodded and took off running, Twilight and Zecora following close behind. Scootaloo watched the group leave, then turned back to Apple Bloom.
The apple and the worm?
She asked, a bemused smile on her face.
Reckon I ain't getting a good at metaphors, Cutie Mark, anytime soon,
the yellow filly lamented.
Reckon you ain't,
Scoots replied. Chapter 6. It was a beautiful afternoon. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and every single other stereotypical example that would define a beautiful afternoon was happening as well. It was so stereotypical an afternoon that it almost seemed fabricated. Real or fake, though, one could not deny that it was, quite simply, a beautiful afternoon. Except for Sweetie Belle. Sweetie Belle could deny it. To Sweetie Belle, it was a dumb afternoon. The birds were dumb. The clouds were dumb. The young pony playing the pastoral from the Filium Tell overture on his flute outside her window was dumb. Even the sun was dumb. Although she didn't dare tell Princess Celestia such a thing. And the thing that was by far the most dumb was dumb old Spike. Dumb old Spike and his dumbness, making fun of her for kissing Sparkstar. And if there was an award for most dumb thing in Equestria, Spike would forget to go and accept it on account of his being so dumb. Dumb, 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 dumb! Sparkstar wasn't dumb. Sparkstar was like the anti-dumb. Sweetie wanted so badly to see him again. But he was gone, and she didn't know when or if he was coming back. She'd tolerate all of her friends' jokes and all of Rarity's giggling and matchmaking if it meant getting him to come back. Of course, that seemed impossible. It probably wasn't impossible, but with how bad a mood Sweetie was in, she just wasn't capable of being positive right now. There was a knock at Sweetie's bedroom door. She grumbled, not in the mood to accept any visitors. She picked up the nearest thing she could get her hooves on and threw it in the direction of the door. She watched as the piece of paper she'd thrown fluttered to the ground about 2 feet away. Perhaps next time she'd hunt down a heavier projectile.
Sweetie Belle,
she heard her sister call from the other side of the door.
You have a visitor, darling.
The filly sighed.
There's no pony here,
Sweetie called out. Obviously, she didn't expect such a tactic to work, but she hoped that her tone of voice would be enough to hint to her sister that she was not in the mood for company. Unfortunately for her, she seemed to have no such luck, as she watched her doorknob become enveloped in Rarity's magic. Sweetie knew that she wouldn't have enough time to dive under the bed before the door was open, but that certainly didn't stop her from trying. Rarity, Twilight, and Spike were greeted by the sight of a pink and purple tail poking out from under the bed, along with 2 white hind legs trying to push herself further under. Any further attempts to hide herself were nullified, as she felt Rarity's magical grasp gently pull her tail. She sighed, not bothering to resist. Resisting would only lead to stronger pulling.
Now, sweetie, there's no need to hide,
Rarity said, pleased that she didn't have to pull harder. She didn't like hurting her sister, after all.
Spiky Wikey here would like to speak to you.
Sweetie heard the name and whirled around, looking quite displeased. She looked straight past Rarity and Twilight, meeting Spike with a steely glance that shook him to his core. Happy Sweetie was pretty and fun. Angry Sweetie was positively terrifying. Still pretty, but terrifying.
I don't want to speak to Spiky Wikey,
Sweetie responded, puncturing the name with a mocking tone. Spike drooped, ready to just leave. But Twilight and Rarity each put a foreleg in front of him to impede his progress.
Sweetie Belle,
Twilight said,
it's very important that Spike tells you this. So please let him speak, okay?
The filly frowned. She could get away with not listening to a direct order from Rarity every once in a while. Such was the benefit of family. But Twilight was a different case. Out of politeness to a friendly adult and authority figure, she begrudgingly sat down.
Okay, let's hear it,
Sweetie said, looking none too pleased. Spike looked at those pale green eyes, trying to summon up the courage for this. He'd practiced what he wanted to say on his way over, and it had seemed so easy and simple. Now that Sweetie was right in front of him, though, it wasn't quite as easy. Apparently Twilight had taken his hesitation as an internal thing rather than nervousness, if the magical nudge she gave Spike was any indication. The dragon took a deep breath. First off, I'm really sorry for upsetting you earlier.
Good,
Sweetie replied, seeming uninterested. I had a good reason, though, Spike quickly followed up, eliciting an eye roll from Sweetie.
Really?
The little filly shot back.
What kind of reason could you possibly have to mock me about kissing Sparkstar?
Her cheeks instantly colored as she heard a giggle from Rarity. Now she would never hear the end of this. It's a really good reason, Spike insisted. I promise. Sweetie did not look impressed. Not one bit. She looked up to her sister, who smiled and gave her a gentle nod. The filly looked back at Spike and let out a hefty sigh.
Okay, let's hear this,
Sweetie said, rolling her eyes. The dragon looked nervously back at Twilight, who gave him the same reaction that Rarity had given Sweetie a moment earlier. He turned his attention back to the pony in front of him and steeled himself. So I was in Twilight's lap the other day, he began, launching into a Pinky-esque string of words, and I was helping her arrange things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself and I woke up the next day as a pony, and then I went outside and spent the day with you and the girls, and I was too nervous to tell you the truth, so I didn't, and then Twilight went out of town and I used the powder on myself again, but I used 2 doses to make the transformation faster. But that made me forget I was a dragon and think I was actually a pony, and then Twilight changed me back into a dragon, but I thought I was just a pony who was turned into a dragon. So I went out to show you and the girls, and then I upset you by accident, but I wasn't making fun of you, I just was bringing it up because I really liked kissing you! Both the filly and dragon turned bright red once more, hearing Twilight and Rarity share a giggle.
So you're...
Sweetie began, but then stopped herself.
That's ridiculous! Why would I ever believe that? It's completely true, Sweetie Belle,
Rarity said, stepping alongside Spike.
He told me every detail before we came upstairs. And I verified all of it,
Twilight said, standing at Spike's other side. Sweetie stared at the three dumbfounded.
Sparkstar?
The filly asked, aware of the answer. The other three nodded. Sweetie just stared at Spike. Moments ago, she was feeling such a strong anger towards him, but now it seemed to all be melting away. She opened her mouth to speak, but then stopped, feeling a bit of anger creep back.
So you weren't thinking right?
Sweetie asked.
And that's why you were acting like you liked me?
No, Spike quickly answered.
That was real, all of it.
He scuffed a foot on the ground, his cheeks coloring.
I really liked spending time with you girls, but I liked spending time with you the most. I really think you're nice and fun and pretty. And if you're okay with a dragon liking you instead of a pony...
He stepped forward and reached one claw out, taking one of Sweetie's hooves. This triggered an excited squeak from Rarity, but he didn't even bother looking back. His focus was squarely on the pony in front of him. Sweetie looked down at her hoof, then up to Spike's nervous yet genuine smile. The corners of her mouth slowly turned up, causing Spike's heart to flutter. She briefly thought about the presence of the two adults in the room with them, but it didn't concern her, as she leaned forward and gave Spike's lips a gentle kiss.
I think I could be okay with it,
the filly said, smiling to the equally smiling dragon. Neither of them were concerned with the happy giggling from Rarity and Twilight. All they cared about at that moment was the other in front of them.
I can't believe you kept that secret, though,
Sweetie said.
Why didn't you just tell us from the start? I was nervous at first that you'd all think I was dumb for spilling that powder on myself, Spike explained. And then by the second time, you girls really liked Sparkstar so much that I didn't think you'd be happy if I told you I'd been lying. Well, yeah, we might have been,
Sweetie replied with a giggle.
But that's all right. Come on, it's still light. We can go see the girls for a bit.
Spike nodded happily.
And maybe you can use that powder again if you want to try being a pony again with us,
Sweetie laughed.
No!
Twilight shrieked. All eyes turned to her and she blushed.
At least not for a while,
the purple unicorn added meekly.
Yeah, what she said,
Spike said to Sweetie.
I was some pony else with you for long enough. Right now, I just want to be me.
Sweetie giggled and gave him a nuzzle before leading him outside. Twilight and Rarity watched them go, both beaming.
My little sister and your assistant,
Rarity said with a chuckle.
Who's like a little brother to me,
Twilight added, nuzzling Rarity's cheek. Rarity froze up.
There isn't some manner of obscure equestrian law against this, is there? I'm sure there isn't.
Twilight chuckled before engaging Rarity in a tender kiss. Rarity smiled contentedly. They'd cross that bridge when or if they came to it.
Well, certainly didn't see that Raritwi ship at the end coming. At least my first time around. Well, that concludes my first reading. Really hope you guys enjoyed that. It was a lot of fun for me. There were some challenges at times, but for the most part, it was really fun. So, I do need to get some more practice in with certain things. I mean, I noticed that in the final copy there were some mistakes. Like for example, I accidentally called Applejack Apple Bloom at some point, and I accidentally read one of the writer's typos. So, but all that aside, I think this was a really good first attempt, and I hope to get better as time goes on. One thing I did notice about this story... Okay, I noticed that someone else had already done this story, but they had only done chapter 1, and so they never finished it, and it looks like they're never going to finish it. So, as far as my rule regarding not doing stories that other people have done. I'm not going to count this one. And basically, if they start a story and they don't update it again, or and if they don't go at it again for several months and it doesn't look like they're going to finish the story, I'm going to consider that fair game and just do it, or allow myself to do that. So basically, if you have any requests that are a story that someone started but didn't finish and never will finish reading, that'll be fine. So, anywho, my next story is going to be a Klopfic. Don't know which one quite yet. Still need to pick it out. But you know, I'll have that out pretty soon. And again, if anyone has any requests, they're always welcome, as well as constructive criticism. So yeah, be sure to like and subscribe. This was a really fun first attempt for me, and there's bloopers at the end of this, if you guys are interested in that. So, but yeah, this was a really fun first attempt for me, and this is just the beginning. So, have a great day, every pony. See you real soon.
Surely it had to be one of the most powerful potions she was capable of brewing. Oh, okay, it's coffee. Scooter Wolf just pounced Sweet Sheepy Belt. After a hard-fought battle, which ended with Scootaloo pinning Sweetie in order to earn the victory for herself and Apple Broom. After a hard-fought battle, which ended with Scootaloo pinning Sweetie to earn the victory. Man. Damn long sentences! But I guess if you don't even want to be as good a sister as some pony who isn't technically related to their little sister.
Oh, no.
But I guess if you don't want to be...
This being funny is making me mess up.
Then shared one more very quick peck before slipping. Not sleeping, slipping. Slipping into their sleeping bags. Okay. Sleeping into their slipping bags. Yeah. Okay. Then shared one more very... Okay. Her studies had been very handy in the delicates of the... Delicates? She sighed lightly as she noticed that the dummy animal... Yeah. The abnormality wrote... Water. The abnormality rose from the disorderly... Damn it, long sentences with big words. The powerful pony's primer to oh, this is gonna be a bitch. The powerful say it 5 times fast. I can't say it 1 time fast. Okay. Whew. The powerful pony's primer to potent potions and powders? No, wait. Oh, that wasn't a question. Profundity. She picked up the nearest thing she could get her hooves on and threw it in the direction of the door. She watched as the piece of paper... I can just imagine this. Apparently Twilight had taken... Come on. You're almost done. Get through this. You can get through this. You can make it through this. As a reward for making it through this, you can see if Leedy's next video is up after this. Just get through this. You can do it. Okay. Apparently Twilight had taken his hesitation as an internal thing rather than nervousness, if the magical nudge she gave Spike was any indication. Yeah, that sounded too weak. So I was oh, okay. It may take me a while to get through this. It may take me a while to get through this next section. I foresee so many takes going on already. Okay. So I was in Twilight's lab the other day, he began, launching into a Pinky-esque string of words, and I was helping her arrange these things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day and I was a pony, and I went outside and spent the day with you and the girls, and I was too nervous to tell you the truth, so I didn't... Okay. From the semi-top. And I was helping her arrange these things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day and I was a pony, and I went outside and I spent the day with you and the girls, and I was too nervous to tell you the truth, so I didn't, and I... So I didn't, and then Twilight... Okay. And I was helping her arrange these things when I accidentally dropped a Okay. And I was helping her arrange these things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day and You can get through this. You can get through this. And I was helping her arrange these things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day a pony, and I went outside and spent the day with you and the girls, and I was too nervous to tell you the truth, so I didn't, and then when Twilight went out of town, I used the powder again, but I used 2 doses to make the transformation faster. But that made me forget I was a dragon, and I was actually a pony, and then Twilight changed me back into a dragon, but I thought I was just a pony who was turned into a dragon, so I went out to show you and the girls when I got upset. I can do this. I can do this. And I was helping her arrange these things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day as a pony, and I went outside and spent the day with you and the girls, and I was too nervous to tell you the truth, so I didn't, and then when Twilight went out of town, I used the powder again, but I used 2 doses on my... So I didn't, and then when Twilight went out of town, I used the powder... I wish this paragraph was slightly shorter. Okay. And I was helping her arrange these things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day as a pony, and then I went outside and spent the day with you and the girls, and I was too nervous to tell you the truth, so I didn't. And then when Twilight went out of town, I used the powder, but I used 2 doses to make the transformation faster. But that made me forget I was a dragon, and I thought I was actually a pony, and then Twilight changed me back into a dragon. But I thought I was just a pony who turned into a dragon. So I went out to show you and the girls, and then I got upset you by accident because I wasn't making fun of you. No, so close! So close! Oh, damn it! Damn it all to hell! Motherfucker! Okay. Alright. Okay. And I was was helping her arrange these things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day as a pony, and then I went outside and I spent the day with you and the girls, and I was too nervous to tell you the truth, so I didn't. And then when Twilight went out of town, I used the powder again, but I used 2 doses to make the transformation faster. But that made me forget I was a dragon and think I was actually a pony. And then Twilight changed me back into a dragon, but that turned...
Ah, motherfucker! Ah! 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 Bam! Son of a bitch. Ah.
Okay, I'm gonna use the bathroom quick and then I'll start from the beginning. Try again from the beginning.
Make you take us away. Discord, are we afraid of? Or are we just a stepping stone to taking over? Okay.
And I was helping her arrange these things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day as a pony, and then I went outside and spent the day with you and the girls, and I was too nervous to tell you the truth, so I didn't, and then Twilight went out of town.
Fuck!
This is the only blooper. This is the only mess up that I'm not too terribly mad at myself for messing up. It's actually kind of funny. Okay. Try again. And I was helping her arrange these things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day as a pony, and then I went outside and spent the day with you and the girls, and I was too nervous to tell you the truth, so I didn't. And then Twilight went out of town, and I used the powder on myself, but I used 2 doses to make the transformation faster. But that made me forget I was a dragon and think I was actually a pony. And then Twilight changed me back into a dragon, but I thought it was just a pony who was turned into a dragon. So I went out to show you and the girls, and then I upset you by accident, but I wasn't making fun of you because... Fuck! And I was helping her Okay, now this is just getting silly. Okay. And I was helping her arrange the things when I... Okay, now it's starting to get frustrating. And I was helping her arrange these things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day as a pony, and then I went outside and spent the day with you and the girls, and I was too nervous to tell you the truth, so I didn't. And then Twilight went out of town, and I used the powder on myself again, but I used 2 doses to make the transformation faster, but that made me forget I was a dragon and think...
This is sad. This is sad. This is so sad.
It should not take this many tries to do this. To get through this. And then I upset you. I am literally 1 line from getting it. The farthest I've gotten, I was 1 line away from getting it. Okay. You can do this. Okay. And I was helping her arrange things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day as a pony, and then I went outside and spent the day with you and the girls, and I was too nervous to tell you the truth, so I didn't. And then Twilight went out of town, and I used the powder on myself again, but I used 2 doses... Okay, that time I ran out of breath. Motherfucker. Okay. And I was helping her arrange things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day as a pony, and then I went outside and spent the day with you and the girls, and I was too nervous to tell you the truth, so I didn't. And then Twilight went out of town, and I used the powder again, but I used the 2... I need water.
And Kevin's with me, and we're all with each other.
Okay.
And I was helping her arrange things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day as a pony, and then I went outside and spent the day with you and the girls, and I was too nervous to tell you the truth, so I didn't, and then Twilight went out of town, and I used the powder on myself again, but then I used 2 doses to make the transformation fatter.
Fatter? Fuck.
And I was helping her arrange these things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day as a pony, and then I went outside and spent the day with you and the girls, and I was too nervous to tell you the truth, so I didn't, and then when Twilight went out of town, I used the powder again, but I used 2 doses to make the transformation faster, but that made me forget I was a dragon and think I was actually a pony, and then Twilight changed me back into a dragon, but I thought I was a pony, so that turned into a...
Meh!
And I was helping her arrange things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day as a pony, and then I went outside and spent the day with you and the girls, and I was too nervous to tell you the truth, so I didn't, and then Twilight went out of town, and I used the powder on myself again, but I used 2 doses instead of 1. And I was helping her arrange things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day as a pony, and then I went outside and I spent the day with you and the girls, and I was too nervous to tell you the truth, so I didn't, and then when Twilight went out of town, I used the powder again, but I used 2 doses to make the transformation faster, but then that made me forget I was a dragon and think I was actually a pony, but then Twilight changed me back into a dragon, and I thought I was just a pony who was turned into a dragon, so I went out to show you and the girls, and then I upset you by accident, but I wasn't making fun of you, but I was just bringing it up.
Damn it! 6 words away. 6 words away, and I ran out of breath. Motherfucker! Shit. Okay.
And I was helping her arrange things when I accidentally dropped a powder on myself, and I woke up the next day as a pony, but then when I went outside and